All right, it is time. We are less than a week away, and the best way to put pen to paper is to bring on my friends to talk and do a live mock draft for you here on 4 for 4. Let's get it going. Hello and welcome to Move the Line. I'm Ryan Noonan, joined by my friends that you are familiar with, Connor Allen, John Daigle, Scott Smith, and we are bringing in the heavyweight, the muscle at this time of year. It is our friend Vegas Refunds, and we're going to do a mock draft. How we doing? Start with you, VR. What's going on, bud?
Happy to be here. Ready to do this.
Yeah, VR took the initiative to kick us and get us going, and let's, we're talking about this all day long, all the time, and let's just do it. We're 6 days away. It is close. I think we are starting to have more fully formed opinions, and I wanted to go through the process of doing a mock draft. If you are hanging out with us on YouTube, watching live, probably the best way to do that. If you're listening in podcast form, we're going to be bringing up the screen and walking through a mock draft. We'll try to make it as podcast friendly as possible. Likes, rates, reviews, all those things wherever you are. If you want to get a betting subscription, get the official picks from us over at 4 for 4. You go to 4for4.com/plans. And you can get the betting subscription. Takes you through next football season. You want to get access to it for cheap. $5 deposit with our partners over at Vivid Picks. Go to the App Store, download Vivid Picks, use promo code 4for4bet, and you'll get an email from them about 24 hours later how to access a 3-month betting subscription, get you all of the draft stuff. So we'll probably go around, take turns, and probably do a little bit of communal style, but we'll do our best here to go through and make some picks. So let me bring this screen up here. There we go. Technology is working. I'll start here. Any disagreement with Bryce Young at number 1? VR.
Just slot him in.
Slot him in. Okay. All right. So the draft starts at 2. Common thing you will hear. Anything that you're doing. Hey, the draft starts at X pick this year. It is 2. You can make a case that the draft starts at 3 now, Connor. We are getting some, positive reinforcement here. The markets have moved in a similar way. We discussed doing maybe a second mock draft because maybe there's an inflection point here at 2 with discussions of what's going on with the Texans. Can they afford to not take a quarterback? Which defender do they like? Some of the stuff that we touched on Tuesday's show. But Connor, I'll kick it to you for the Texans here.
Yeah, for me, I'll just start it off with, I think that they're going to have to pick a quarterback here. And part of the reason is because, everything I've been hearing behind the scenes has been that Nick Caserio had a pretty tumultuous offseason, kind of bumping heads with the ownership a little bit, didn't necessarily get his pick for the head coach. And now is at a point where if they don't pick a quarterback, you're rolling out Davis Mills, Case Keenum again. Like, it seems like a spot where I don't think he makes it through the year. At least if there's a rookie, maybe you can sell some hope. So I think that based on everything we've heard, Will Levis is their second-ranked quarterback on the board. That's my current lean. Now, that being said, I think that anyone could be like a kind of a sellable quarterback outside of Davis Mills and Case Keenum. If they trade for Trey Lance, where there's been rumors about that, or someone of that caliber that could at least sell hope that they have the illusion of winning, I think would make sense. So personally, I lean Will Levis, and I'll kind of like start it out there. If anyone has any, other thoughts on kind of this pick.
I'm literally good with anyone but Stroud. Like, in terms of like how I would rank these guys, it would go probably Levis, Tyree, a little bit of a space, Anderson, and then anyone else is just like take a lap. Which both of those between QB and D line, we have totally different blueprints on how it can roll out. But I fully support Levis.
Famous last words. I am still fairly certain they're not taking a quarterback at number 2. Ooh. Everyone keeps contributing to the idea that they don't want to roll into the season without one to sell their fans. When have they wanted one to sell their fans? I think you're looking at it illogically whenever they haven't proven that they're going to step in, right? Even when listening to that Daniel Jeremiah, Pete Schrager co-mock, it wasn't said as if they are certain of what will happen. They were literally in jest with one another. And Jeremiah said, but Pete, it only takes one. It only takes one person stepping in. Like, they have no idea, and nothing suggests they'll take a quarterback here. So still in very high belief it's going to be Tyree Wilson. And right now, there's no reason to think otherwise.
No reason else to think otherwise. Is a very strong statement.
Hard disagree.
That's okay. That's fine.
Yeah, Scott, I'm gonna give the floor to you, bud.
I tend to lean the same side as Daigle. Not only is my pushback a little bit against Will Levis, who I think Houston, if they do want him, has an opportunity to move up from 12. But I just tend to go with the evaluations on Stroud over what you've seen out of Will Levis. We've heard that, Hendon Hooker's on some boards ahead of Will Levis and some of these other guys. So I'm leaning at one of these two edge rushers in either Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson here at 2, and that's what's going to be reflected in my next mock draft.
Who do you lean, Tyree or Anderson?
As of right now, I tend to lean Anderson.
Not only that, but remember, Texans have number 12 overall pick. They have 3 picks on day 2, including the number 33 overall pick. I'm pretty sure they get something done to quote unquote sell their fans, even though, again, they're not trying to sell their fans anything. No one's ever stepped in and tried to sell Texans fans anything at all. And so that's where I think they get quarterback done with Trey Lance, only because of the ties with the DC in Houston, with D'Amico Ryans. That's where I lean right now. I genuinely don't think there's any interest in a quarterback at number 2.
I agree with Patrick in the comment section here. They have the 12th pick, but I think we all agree or are in some of the same circles and discussions that the Colts have Will Levis, whatever we think of the prospect, the Colts have him as the top guy on their board. So theoretically, they could trade up, but what are they going to select 2 and 3? That seems a little bit of a tough sell to me for them to get up to 3 to make that happen. Now, again, they have the resource to do so. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I feel like that your interdivision rival has the guy there as well. I mean, they have to know that if we know some of that stuff too, right? So we're interested. It's interesting here. So kind of have Connor with a not super strong Will Levis take. I think VR was more of a stronger Levis take. And then we're split there with Daigle and Scott in terms of what's going to happen. I'm going to break the tie because I guess as the host, I get to do that because based off of what the market's telling and some of the movement, this is a Will Levis. Based off my portfolio, gosh, better be Will Levis. So we have the second one. I'm keeping the second one on the side, and we could talk through that at the end of the show once we get through the first one. So, Daigle, since you got overworked here, first of all, I know your discussion or your opinion here. Trades, or you're a non-trade guy in mock draft? I will just say, if anyone has a really strong take and they want to make a trade when I'm tossing the pick to you, we could discuss it as a group too, but I know Daigle feels pretty strongly about not making the trades. But JD, I'll kick it to you for the Cardinals at 3, who are, again, obviously I bring that up because they're a pretty popular trade.
I also just think the trades are common thought right now, and they don't make much sense considering I don't know who has the capital to move up. Like the Eagles have the capital to move up, which is why when I hear like Eagles moving up to 8, for instance, to grab Bijan Robinson, the Eagles have all the plethora in the world. No big deal. It doesn't hurt them whatsoever to take a running back. But the Titans, again, 3 picks in the top 146. They're rumored to come to 3. I don't know how they get up to 3. I don't believe the Titans trade up at all. That's why I think they just stand put or trade back instead. Who else would also move up to 3? Maybe the Raiders, but since Patriots cronies all think alike, they don't have opinions for themselves. They all are literally saying, all 3 in Josh McDaniels, Michael Lombardi, and Nick Caserio, that they are down on CJ Stroud and don't consider him a real prospect. In that case, I don't think the Raiders are moving up at all either. So no, I think the Cardinals just stay put as they've done to this point of the process. And we've all heard, and I believe it's the right sources, they have Tyree Wilson vehemently over Will Anderson. So if Tyree Wilson is here, that's where they go. Otherwise, we have a real conversation about what they do. And I just think, although Wilson is ahead of Anderson on their board, that does not mean Anderson is not the pick. I think they may just settle. We've all seen their defensive depth chart. It is absolute garbage, especially in trying to replace J.J. Watt. So I think it's just an easy call here. Although it's not sexy, it's not fun. I think it's just Will Anderson if Tyree Wilson's gone.
I do think if Levis goes 2, I think the Lions are live to trade up. They definitely have the assets. And if quarterback is a top of their priority, like they would have to probably, let's assume, jump the Colts or jump the Colts and Seahawks would be very live for AR, which they wouldn't have to give up anything astronomical from 6 to 3. and they have the assets. And I've always thought they were alive and like kind of the team that was the most live to make a trade that no one's really talking about, which they'd be a good fit in terms of like the bridge quarterback type team with, you could argue if Goff is that or not. But they would have to probably jump the Seahawks and the Colts if they want AR.
Scott, you mentioned that on our last show that they're a team that's live to trade up as well. Any more insight into that?
Yeah, the two players that I've actually like looked at and seen them. One is Tyree Wilson, and the other one was actually Stroud. Surprisingly, I just don't think from a fit as far as Detroit that Anthony Richardson is going to fit within that offense and the way they want to run things. It's too big of a jump from Goff to Richardson. So I believe that if Detroit is going to be live to go ahead and move up to 3, it would be for Stroud.
We do have, in this instance, Will Levis off the board at 2, and Arizona kind of essentially making the pick. Pretty good intel, trusted source that we all agree that seems to say Tyree is ahead of Will Anderson on the Cardinals board. I think that's an actionable source that's proven to be actionable in the past. I trust that, Connor. So what are your thoughts here with pick 3?
Yeah, I would lean Tyree. I like having multiple sources of confirmation, and it seems like that's what we're getting, but I know VR is nodding his head over there. Generally I'm only at like 1 or 2 right now, but maybe you have, a couple other people chirping in your ear saying the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple certainties in the top 5. It's 1, Bryce is going 1, and then based off of what everyone's heard, or whether it's Lance Zierlein or people behind the scenes, that the Cardinals have Tyree ahead.
And just looking at the list of meetings, they've had multiple meetings with Tyree Wilson, including a top 30 visit. So the Arizona Cardinals have definitely been kicking the tires on Tyree Wilson, and I would definitely put them a little bit more in that camp rather than Will Anderson.
All right, so currently Will Anderson 3.5 is, we just discussed it, 2 to the Texans. But interesting thing here with the Cardinals. VR 4 with the Colts. What are your thoughts now that their alleged guy Will Levis is off the board?
God, this is like the hardest one if Levis is off. I'm just gonna go AR. Like, you hear Richardson totally like bombed his interviews with the Colts. But then we have CJ Stroud, who those McGinn, whatever his name is, this morning about his elementary level S2 test, whatever the hell that is it's just a tough scene where if I hadn't seen that, like I would like if I didn't know he got like an 18% on his S2, I'd be like, okay, Stroud, like just pencil him in at 4. But at the same time, I mean, I would say I would probably AR and like pencil, but I'm not totally like sold. It's one of the 2 quarterbacks.
The one wrench in this, Noonan, is that, as we know, for a shameless plug, Kevin Bowen, who has covered the Colts for over a decade, came on the 4for4 podcast, the most accurate podcast, and said the one thing that has stuck around between Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay has always been quarterback accuracy. And yet, Will Levis, he even said, is number 1 on their board. And if CJ Stroud's here, literally, there was no one who had a higher completion rate, who had more accuracy in both intermediate, 10 to 19 yards, and deep, 20-plus yards, levels of the field, than CJ Stroud in his class. That's the one thing I keep trying to wrap my head around. It's like, if it comes down to accuracy, take an accurate quarterback. Literally, not the most inaccurate quarterback outside of Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. But we've heard from, I think it's 4 separate voices who don't have Patriots ties, and they have different opinions and come to different conclusions, that Will Levis is the number 1 quarterback on their board. And so that's the only reason I keep coming back to Levis going at this pick if he's still around.
It didn't strike. Isn't there a quote from him recent? Maybe it was like today, where you have that accuracy aspect, but then something came out where he thinks accuracy can be taught as well. Like if your numbers in college weren't.
That's an amazing quote. I need to find that.
I think I swear I saw something today.
He did say that, yeah, which is outrageous, but he did say it.
He may actually be biased too, since Jalen Hurts who is an amazing story because he legitimately improved every year, whereas Josh Allen was a train wreck for 2 years. And then because he picked up golf, it clicked. Like he even says, I learned how to swing differently to make different shots. And I took that to my football game and I learned how to throw the ball. And so Jalen Hurts is such the anomaly. But if you have recency bias because Steichen developed Hurts, that would make sense totally in an NFL mind.
And right now, if AR doesn't go, he could fall if someone doesn't trade up. But if Stroud doesn't go, like I think his ceiling is the Raiders, we would assume. Which, yeah. I mean, if you want to make the connection to the Eagles,
we'll get there.
The Eagles with like AR fits the Eagles offense more since that's the offense that he's bringing. Yeah, I mean, I'll let you guys decide this one.
I'm comfortable with that. I think Scott really wants CJ Stroud here.
I could go there. That's
just based off of my reading of Scott. This doesn't mean Scott gets his way. I'm just trying to read Scott's body language here a little bit too. So, Scott, what are your thoughts?
And quickly, Scott, let's note to everyone, Scott is literally a top 5 accurate mock drafter in the nation for the last 5 years. That's the person you should listen to. The rest of us are donkeys. So go ahead, Scott.
I just look at it and look, we're here trying to connect the dots and grabbing at straws of any piece of information that we can get. And throughout this entire process, and we start talking about the S2 and we start talking about some of this negative information that's come out here on Stroud over the last few days. Brady Quinn said he didn't show up to the Manning Passing Academy, and then Stroud turns around and says, well, I never committed to the Manning Passing Academy. Then you have the S2 test that's been, getting a whole lot of buzz in pub lately. But like you have teams like Houston that say they don't even subscribe to the S2 test. They have something completely different. So I think when you have to sit here and connect the dots to a lot of this, and you're talking about the unknown, what's going to happen within these rooms, I tend to lean and fall back on the grade that is there for some of these players. And I think Stroud, throughout the entire process, has had the higher grade than what you're looking at here with Anthony Richardson. There was a lot of buzz after the combine because he ran fast, was super athletic, and all of those things. But we knew all of that going in. I think when you look at the body of work that Stroud has there in college, I don't see how that Anthony Richardson would be the pick over Stroud.
The Stroud buzz to me almost feels a little bit like Kayvon Thibodeau kind of esque last year, where we got like word like, oh, he bombed his visit to the Giants. We bombed all these visits. Is not a good fit. And then he ends up still going to the Giants anyways. Like, I know that we're hearing kind of behind the scenes, not quite as publicly, that Stroud has bombed his visits, but at the same time, like it has been just like a negative drumbeat for the last week and a half on Stroud with all the stuff that Scott mentioned that was, I mean, fairly easily debunked on some of it, but like, he just hasn't had that public support. So I don't know. It does almost seem like the Colts could be ecstatic and he would wind up being the number 1 quarterback on their board, at 4 over Will Levis, even though we've heard otherwise. So I don't know, just something to keep in mind, I think.
My only issue with that, and I'm not even saying you're wrong. Like, I think it's right. I think if you're talking about accuracy, Stroud very clearly over Levis. Stroud is amazing. The only thing is we knew from the very beginning, Brian Dable, Joe Shane, and Mike Kafka were playing a different game than everyone else, where Irsay and Ballard have never shown us that in just the last few years of Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan. So that's my only thing, is saying that I don't think they're smart enough to play games, to be honest. But I could be wrong, and Stroud over Levis would fit the mold, honestly. So it makes sense.
I mean, the early buzz with it, they like Stroud. At least that's what I remember. Noonan, I don't know. You wanted to jump in there, but...
Well,
yeah,
I do agree. Daigle because when Daigle came on last week with his mock draft, he had Will Anderson to the Colts. Will Anderson still on the board in this process. Has anything changed for you? Where are you at again? He's, we're talking just kind of 1 or 2 quarterbacks, but the guy that you slotted in your mock. And again, so much information changes, so I'm not holding you to a mock you made 2 weeks ago.
Of course.
Just curious what your process is.
For the Colts and the Lions, what changes for me is that I didn't think CJ Stroud would be there. And now I guess we're confirming he will be. And I think that changes for a lot of people from pick number 4 on. And so your mocks should change, considering now we have to play the smokescreen game that Stroud will be there. So of course, and the fact that Scott is piecing the dots better than myself together and thinks that Stroud will be number 4, that makes me happy, because it does make sense. And the only hump I could not get over was the news cycle hump. And so there's clearly something blind in my game, maybe. So yeah, I like that Scott's on that, because that makes a lot more sense, honestly.
All right, 1-word answer.
Sorry.
For your pick, Connor.
It's Stroud.
JD.
There you go.
Yeah, I heard. It's Stroud or Levis. I'll
No,
still go Levis
one word.
right now.
Levis
That
is
could
off
change-
the board. He
no,
went
one,
second.
One word. Sorry.
Levis is off the board. He went second.
Oh, that's wrong. Stroud. So wrong.
All right, Stroud it is. Because I know Scott's answer. I'm with you, VR. I'm kind of on a Rich there. All right, Seattle 5. Scott, I'll let it kick to you. We've talked about Anthony Richardson being an option there. We feel pretty good, and Daigle, I know, probably will want to interject around. Feel like they want to cross Jalen Carter off as an option there, even though there's probably a team needs fit. There seems to be enough of a drumbeat there that Carter seems to not be an option for them. Great spot for them. Seems like Will Anderson's on the board. Seems to me like an Anderson or Richardson discussion, Scott, but I'll let you get started.
Yeah, I actually think Will Anderson's easy selection here for me as far as like nomination. I think Jalen Carter is in play here, and I also think Anthony Richardson's in play here. Really, for me, I just think Will Anderson, while he might not be the elite prospect that a lot of other teams or even some evaluators think he is, he's maybe the cleanest prospect of what's left here. And we talked earlier in the season, whenever we talked about 4 quarterbacks possibly going 1 through 4, how excited Seattle would be with that. In this situation, I'm going to go ahead and lean Will Anderson. They could probably use 3 edge defenders in this draft coming out of the first couple of rounds. So I think he would be the selection here and just check off, more of the boxes. Whereas Jalen Carter, you have some off the field concerns, as far as him, and then Anthony Richardson, you have some development concerns as to whether or not he's going to need a redshirt year or 2 before you can go ahead and trust him. So here, I just think Will Anderson checks more of the boxes for Seattle.
What you got, VR?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like prioritizing how Seattle will go, I think it's Anderson, Richardson, Tyree, Jalen.
Daigle, you want to cross Jalen Carter off the list here?
I would like to, yeah. Again, that Peter Schrager, Daniel Jeremiah mock they did together, everyone can listen to it at Move the Sticks. They collaborated, and they had not talked before then about their intel, and both had separate conclusions as to why Jalen Carter's not the pick. That alone is enough for me. Danny Kelly also, who is very tight with the Seahawks organization and just loves the Seahawks, like passion in their organization, so he pays attention to everything, also crossed Jalen Carter off the list. That's enough sources for me. The only reason I continue putting Anthony Richardson there to them is because in most of my mocks, Anderson and Wilson are not there. I assume they run to the board for whomever's left over if one of those 2 get there. So if one of those 2 are there, like Scott said, Anderson's the very clear pick.
Connor, pick to the Seahawks.
Yeah, in this instance, Anderson. I disagree slightly with Luke. I think that they have Tyree Wilson ahead of Will Anderson, or at least it's like a coin flip right now. I think it's a little bit closer than you're suggesting. But I do think AR is in play. I know our buddy Rob Statton has gone on about that. I think very much in play with Geno Smith on a 1-year contract, a contract set up so that he easily get out in 1 year. So that's the only way I'd flip it. But otherwise, I think we're all in lockstep.
All right. Well, pop Will Anderson in there. Lions had some, I don't want to call it take lock, but maybe we've had a little take lock in terms of what's happening with the Lions. VR, I'll let you get started with your thoughts on Detroit at 6.
So I do think like Witherspoon is like the consensus pick here. That's who I'm definitely going to recommend for the pick at 6, where I do think it is a little bit overblown to that just because they traded Okudah, they're like automatically going corner, where even like on DraftKings, the odds at corner were like -250. And then a couple days ago, I checked and all of a sudden D-line was -105 and corner was even odds, which was like, why? But it would be Witherspoon, Carter, definitely allowed to trade back or trade up. But I just think Witherspoon's kind of just as easy of a pick right here as Anderson was.
Scott, floor is yours. I know we've been talking about the Lions as being a trade-off option. In this scenario, they have a quarterback fall to them. What are you thinking? You've also kind of been a little bit of a Gonzalez guy over Witherspoon as well throughout the process.
Yeah, I have pushed back on, Witherspoon being the first cornerback off the board due to some of the trends in past history of the last 10 years with GMs drafting underclassmen as the first defensive back off the board. Then you had the news come out today where you had some Lions players get suspended, some indefinitely, one for 6 games. And they also fired some coaches, from what I understand, and some staff members for some gambling that happened inside of the facility there in Detroit. So when you start looking at some of that, I think that kind of takes a little bit of the steam off of Jalen Carter being the pick here. I would still kind of push back and have Gonzalez maybe as being the pick over Devon Witherspoon. I as I've said, I think it's a 1A, 1B situation. So if somebody wants to go Witherspoon here, I'm not going to fight it that hard.
JD, where are you at with Detroit?
Completely agree. I'm having a tough time pinpointing Lions, especially because VR behind the scenes, I know we have discussions. He personally set CJ Stroud's line at 6.5. And I think it's perfect because Stroud had the most work done, arguably, in the entire draft by Detroit. He seemed to be the quarterback this team wanted. And now I think there's a real chance he just falls to them. And so do they just reconfigure their entire draft board with another pick at 18 to make sure they get Stroud here? I certainly think it's possible if he's there. But Witherspoon makes sense. Jalen Carter, I have no idea what they think of character concerns. I think they would be out, but I could be wrong there. So I'm willing to listen. I think Witherspoon makes more sense than Carter personally.
Connor, where are you at? I know we've been kind of, lockstep too with Witherspoon to Detroit in terms of, the man tendencies based off of how he was used at the U of I, based off of what Detroit liked to do last year, running back similar, coaching staff and some of that stuff that you would expect the scheme to stay the same. And, not to say that Christian Gonzalez can't come and play man in the NFL. Witherspoon just has kind of been an easier fit for me.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Also, Lance Zierlein came out today and said that Spoon tested better than Gonzalez in S2, since that seems to be the common buzzword around everything. Who knows how much that shit even matters for being a corner, but whatever. I think it's a talking point that's worth, at least addressing. Patrick brought up in the chat, Carter isn't known for gambling, just incredibly reckless driving. I think it's more the concept of bringing in a troubled player into an organization that, is already kind of going through a little bit of turmoil right now. And so, like, having your kind of rock in place there and not having gone through just a gambling scandal to bring in a guy who's a little bit, I guess, seemingly troubled doesn't make much sense. So I'm going to go with Witherspoon here, but honestly, I don't feel as good as the odds suggested as right now. I think for like a large field market, like I feel like there's a little bit more volatility. I'm just not really sure the best way to approach it at this point.
The other pushback I have against cornerback specifically at this position is that the staff has come out and said that they're not overly concerned that cornerback is a top priority for them with things in the way it's going. Also, when you start looking at this draft, there are deeper positions, and cornerback happens to be one of them here in this draft. And with them at 18, there are some players that they've brought in and have visit with that happen to play cornerback. So I do think it's a situation where you could see them address the cornerback position at 18 rather than here at 6.
100%. 100. Or like if they go like Jalen Carter, then you might as well like subtract a spot on every corner over under in the 20s right now, because that's just going to drag them all down. Like Banks is at like 20.5, which might as well be 19.5 if they go Jalen, or 18.5. I could not agree with that more.
If I could flip one card to show everyone in this draft, it would 100% be Jalen Carter's landing spot, because I think that would open up the rest of the draft and mocks for us, honestly.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Like I liked it. I hate that it's like moved to the consensus. And I think Scott's point around the depth of the position, even the second round, there are some viable cornerbacks that I think are going to go in the top 50 of this draft. So, if something happens, this is why the way this board's fallen with even Richardson there, I just don't think that's I wouldn't comfortably cross that off. I think that's very much in the range of outcomes. Connor, failing to give a shout out here.
Yeah, I dropped the ball here. Dane brought that up in one of our little degenerate group chats there. So shout out Dane. One of the, I don't even know if I know anyone else who bets more on the draft than Dane. So shout out to him. Serious,
Right,
like a serious sick puppy, man. That guy's like a sick human being in a good way.
For the sake of the process, we're going to go Witherspoon and keep the train rolling here with the Raiders to Scott here at 7. Let you get your first thoughts on the board here.
Look, I think there's a ton of ways that the Raiders could go here. Their defense, I've been harping on for a while, has just been absolutely atrocious, and has really been kind of the reason why I think they've lost so much. You've got Anthony Richardson here on the board. You've got Jalen Carter as well. I've heard that Jalen Carter is not in play for the Raiders. For whatever reason, I don't think things have gone quite as well as what they could have there. So I'm hearing that he's off the board. You've got offensive line that's come up, but look, I think I'm going to go ahead and kind of end the fall because I don't know how far the fall would go. And I'm just going to go ahead and put Anthony Richardson here at 7 for the Raiders. If not here, then it's going to be a long fall.
Daigle, we've talked about the Jimmy G contract. They did a great job structuring it. Allows them to lock into Jimmy G for a couple of years if he stays healthy and performs, and gives them flexibility to get out of that if they happen to land in a spot like this where they can add a true difference maker for the long term. What are your thoughts with the Raiders at 7?
I don't think I have strong thoughts on Anthony Richardson. I'm not pushing back, certainly, especially since McDaniels is the one who previously overthrew Denver management and traded up for Tim Tebow. That was 100% his choice. And Anthony Richardson is not Tebow. He has a much higher ceiling. But in terms of a project quarterback, McDaniels has already taken one on for high capital. Why couldn't he take another one on? So definitely don't hate it. But I still have, in this situation, these picks down to one of Christian Gonzalez, Paris Johnson, or Peter Skoronski. I'm hoping VR maybe has a lean on either Paris Johnson or Peter Skoronski because I think we're hearing both, and I don't know which one the Raiders would prefer if they're leaning tackle over every other position.
So there's there's a couple scenarios with this pick, which I think 7 is probably, like, in terms of if the Cardinals don't trade, I think 7 is like the most live, 7 and 8, because teams like if the Texans don't go QB, let's just say, or teams like the Texans and the Titans at 11 and 12, trading up into 7 for, let's say, AR, who might be falling. Both of these teams, being the Raiders and the Falcons, can most likely, there's a good probability that they can get the same guys at 11 and 12 that they would already be taking at 7 or 8. Like, if the Falcons are trending towards Nolan Smith, like, they can probably get him at 11 or 12. They might be able to get Christian Gonzalez at 11 and 12. And then you have the Bears, the Eagles. If they want Jalen Carter, they can trade up to 7, or the Cardinals trading back to 7 and getting Jalen Carter anyway. But Charlie Campbell, who I think most know on Walter
He's been pretty accurate. Yeah.
He's very accurate, and they've been harping their connections to the Raiders, and they've had Paris Johnson at 7 for over a month at this point. And like, I don't want to, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid here. And Paris Johnson's over-under was 10.5. And I want to say 2 days ago, it got crushed down to 9.5, which 10.5 was kind of a dead number anyway. But there was nothing that I saw. There was no discords that I could connect the dots as to why Paris Johnson's over-under would come down, other than something like him going earlier, like 7, than we expect. If I'm making a mock, I'm putting Paris Johnson, and Charlie better not be wrong. But Gonzalez, but Gonzalez probably is the safest pick, and probably most likely.
The problem with the Raiders is they need pretty much everything, so it's really hard to land a needs-based selection here as a tiebreaker because they don't have a long-term solution at quarterback. It's one of the worst defenses in the league. They need edge help, they need corner help, and they could use offensive line help. So they're really, really hard to pinpoint. Like,
if I'm making a mock draft, I'm putting Christian Gonzalez, but if I'm making a bet, I'm betting Paris Johnson at 7.
Okay.
Because his odds are way more fun.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's an interesting point too, right? Because we are talking about this more from a betting standpoint than, team needs and how we want the Raiders to be, ready to hit the field in 2023. Connor, what are your thoughts on the Raiders? I do agree that just for a multitude of reasons, and I don't want to make light of this, they cannot pick Jalen Carter. Like, lives have been lost already with excessive speed. The Raiders in the last couple of years with early first round picks. Like, they cannot pick Jalen Carter. Just as a really tough one for me to swallow.
Yeah, he hit the nail on the head there. So no Jalen Carter. I think Paris Johnson, Christian Gonzalez, both of them are in play. Still kind of trying to decipher which one they wind up picking. I think Anthony Richardson is very much in play as well. But there were some rumblings about, I don't know, maybe like they need to win now. I mean, they have Jamie Garoppolo, but he's, fragile. I don't know. I'm pretty torn on this pick, honestly. If anyone has a strong take, we can just go that way.
Like if Titans trading to 7, Titans taking AR, the Raiders are probably going to get Gonzalez at 11 anyway. I know we're not doing trades, John, but that one just makes sense.
I love how everyone points at me because behind the
You've been
scenes,
adamant.
well, I think trades are a beta move.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Go ahead
I agree.
and I'll put that on record. Yeah, cheap way out, cheap clicks.
Yeah, I won't do it, but some familiarity with the Patriots and the Raiders, some familiarity with Josh McDaniels and Mac Jones. I might just be fanboying out and want to see AR in a red, white, and blue uniform because that would be a lot of fun. But Connor's giving me the nah wave. But go ahead, Daniel.
The Raiders start the beginning of teams where you then start arguing who is higher on their board. And that's the hardest question to answer in this draft, right? Like the Eagles at 10, who is the highest on their board because they have their pick of the litter. You could do that for the Texans at 12. You could do that for the Packers. You could do that for the Ravens, for the Jaguars, for the Seahawks again at 20. This is when it gets really tough because it's really just becomes a guessing game from here, honestly.
All right, Scott, one name to the Raiders.
Look, the pushback I'll have is that if Anthony Richardson doesn't get here, it's just as easy to slide him in down there to Tennessee at 11. So I'm fine if we go Christian Gonzalez. I agree. I don't have an issue with it.
Okay. That was well said, and it makes it nice and easy and saves us time. We are on the Falcons at 8. We've had Falcons feel similar in a way to like the Lions, in which we've kind of felt like we've landed on this group consensus of like it's such a home run spot for the Falcons to take Bijan here. We're gonna get a little bit of input, I think, from producer Dan, a passionate, I think UT fan and Falcons fan, but I don't know what he's wanting to do here. But he's in the chat. I'm going to let you contribute here, and I'll let you get started VR with kind of some of the alternatives, and if you want to kick on some Bijan stuff for the Falcons as well before we hear from producer Dan.
Yeah, the 3 trending names are going to be Van Ness, which it feels like he's falling, Nolan, and then Bijan, where Bijan I think is the favorite for this pick, but everything that you see on Twitter or all the Falcon experts are implying Nolan, which I'm kind of just defaulting to those and going with Nolan. He makes sense for multiple. He's a great fit. I think he would be like an outside linebacker there this year. But yeah, I'm just going Nolan. I think it's a 2-headed race between Bijan or Nolan, which I would love to get Bijan out of the way right now, because he's the other landmine that we have absolutely no idea where he's going to go.
Yeah. If we kick Bijan down the road here, this is going to get really interesting.
Yeah, I'll go Bijan. Yeah, Bijan.
All right, Dan thinks it is okay. Nolan Smith or Van Ness. Does not think it'll be Bijan. Yeah, I mean, I get the Nolan Smith thing too. I'm also thinking like, all right, so these are Falcons fans. They're probably Georgia fans too. So maybe there's a little bit of like, I don't know, fanboy bias where like they're thinking, hey, we want to keep our guy in town. I don't know. That could be me just pushing back a little bit on that too. Doesn't mean that he's a better fit or a better player than Van Ness. But Daigle, what are your thoughts here on the Falcons?
And I think Nolan Smith really starts at 5, honestly, with the Seahawks. If Anderson and Tyree Wilson are gone, I'm down to 2 picks for the Seahawks, Anthony Richardson and Nolan Smith. That's where it starts. And so it makes sense if you think they go edge. I still don't think they go edge. I still have Bijan Robinson. I haven't budged off of it. Nothing has suggested I should budge off of it. So I'm right now still confident in Bijan to 8, and it doesn't matter about whether you think it's right or wrong and team building and taking on a 5th-year option for a running back doesn't matter at all. I just think it's who they draft.
It's Skoronski's live here too. Like I think O-line for the Falcons is like a very dark horse, but like Skoronski's definitely live, or even Paris as well. I think Schrager had Skoronski here. Someone has. There's a couple that I've just seen Falcons going O-line.
That means they immediately kick him inside, which is a given at 314. But like that's a team declaring, hey, you're playing on inside immediately. Yeah, and to be the first offensive lineman, that's pretty wild.
We could have that same thing with Skoronski, though, right? I mean, Skoronski very much could be, especially the first couple of years, depending on where he lands, could play guard as well. So, Connor, thoughts on the Falcons? I know we've talked about coming off of the Bijan stuff. Your recent mock had something different too.
I mean, yeah, I had originally ruled out a guy like Jalen Carter at 8, but I don't think we necessarily should. I mean, they signed Calais Campbell, but he's old as shit. And if they really think that they can improve Jalen Carter here, again, if they think that they can change him, I think he's a great fit on basically any team. So personally, in this spot, I would probably just go Bijan because we've actually heard some tangible reporting, but I know that that was my biggest pushback before, was we just haven't heard anything outside of it makes sense. Now we finally heard some reports. It's more than just it making sense. So I think in this spot, it's probably either Nolan Smith or Bijan, but I mean, it could go a variety of directions.
Scott, where are you at, buddy?
My pushback on Bijan is that that's a coaching staff that has shown that they can generate production in the rushing game without having an elite pass rush. I mean, elite rusher. The opposite side of the ball, they finished near the bottom in nearly every pass rushing metric there is in the NFL. They hired a new defensive coordinator who's from down here in New Orleans. I've actually had some run-ins with him, and I think that they can produce as far as rushing, but they've shown nothing to show that they can produce what they have as far as a pass rush. So I would tend to lean a little bit more towards Nolan Smith at this point in time.
Man, the only thing I keep coming back to is that Connor mentioned Campbell, but they also overpaid David Onyemata to follow Ryan Nielsen to Atlanta. They overpaid Caden Ellis as well as an off-ball linebacker, a 3-year, $21.5 million deal. That's crazy. So it just seems like they have so much money already tied into their front seven that I don't know, man. I just can't wrap my head around it.
And they did add a couple of second-round edge rushers last year in the draft to, maybe they want to give those guys a little bit of look as well. Sorry, producer Dan. We do not want. I don't want to kick the can down the road, guys. I don't want to mess with.
Honestly, I think it's best. Yeah, I think we get this out of the way. Otherwise, there are going to be so many arguments about Dallas trading up. I don't want to have them at all.
No, I don't want to have the Patriots discussion here either. We have him buried thanks to our friends over at PFF. We're using their
question
simulator.
Noonan, does it stop at 10 anyhow? If we kick Bijan down the road, should the line be 10.5 because he doesn't get past that?
Bijan,
smoke. Washington's not taking him. That's complete smoke.
I mean, you got Caesars with his over under. You got it. 15.5 is his line on Caesars.
That's wild.
And then I think it's 12.5 on FanDuel. So literally no one has a fucking clue.
Yeah, everyone has an idea.
It seems very much like I just assume it stops at 10. It's Eagles take them. We'll take care of the rest later in the first round. No big deal.
Yeah, I mean,
especially if we think Van Ness or Myles Murphy dip, which Murphy, as we've all seen, his line has increased of late. VR, what did it get up to? 15.5.
Murphy.
Yeah.
So it was 19.5. Went down to 18, then it came back up, and then it went back down. So yeah, it's just teetering between 18 and 19, which 19 you have the Bucs, which is a trendy pick towards, where I guess that's kind of the key number, I guess you could say, in terms of the over-unders, which that over-under is way too low if you just use mock drafts. But
it's too juiced, but I still think the Bijan number is 10.5. I think that's the fairest number, but again, under 12.5 is too juiced, so you can't even bet it.
Yeah, Bijan's under on Caesars at 15.5 is -2 something, but then the over at 12.5 is -2 something too. So it's
what a joke.
Michael Lombardi did point out on his show yesterday that he's been told by 2 GMs that Bijan Robinson will not make it out of the top 10.
Yeah, because the Eagles stopped that slide for sure. Yeah.
Well, so it's a little bit easier as you get towards the bottom of 10 to stomach, in comparison to what happened with the Giants, because again, it always comes down to, and for Sam Monson over PFF had done a great job really at kind of explaining this essentially positional surplus. Because if you draft Bijan inside the top 5, you are paying him as if he's a top 3 running back in the league. Part of the advantage in good team building comes from building roster surplus at the position. So it's a little bit easier to swallow what you're paying Bijan. I'd say closer to here, 8, 9, 12 versus if you were to pay him where, the Giants took Saquon. Because again, knowing that he probably has that in his range of outcomes to be instantly one of the top 5 running backs in the league, it's just very hard to ensure that if he is, well, then he's just kind of meeting the expectation of where you are in terms of where you're slotting, financial allocations to the roster build. So a little bit easier once you slide down. And again, it definitely feels like one of those generational talents at the position, Diggle.
We do also have a quick update as all the hef in the chat says Bijan top 10 is even money on DraftKings. And I just bet it live and got $7.50 down on it. So get ready for the line to move due to my ass being limited, like everything else I'm limited on.
Thank you, DraftKings. Fantastic. Connor, the Bears at 9. We've made a pick. We've made an official bet in the 4for4 Discord. You, me, and Scott aligned with a player going to the Bears who is now fallen, I guess, is, again, the Jalen Carter stuff is what I'm dancing around. Jalen Carter's agents been very clear. Hey, we're not meeting with you outside the top 10. Not because we don't think a team can trade up. We're not meeting with you unless you're telling us you're trading up, because we have basic guarantees that Jalen Carter is not falling outside of the top 10. I'm sure the Eagles would love to land him as well. They have needs up front. But again, so do the Bears. What are your thoughts, Connor, on Bears at 9?
Yeah, from my understanding, Jalen Carter was in consideration for them to be the number 1 overall pick alongside, when they had the pick, alongside Tyree Wilson. So in this spot, if they're able to trade down, get multiple firsts, DJ Moore and second, I think they would be ecstatic to land a guy like Jalen Carter. They've done extensive work on him. Ryan Poles seems pretty convinced that he can kind of, change that character as well. We don't have a massive sample size for him, but that's just, again, things that I'm hearing from people who are basically been spot on all offseason about, them trading down, with who they're trading down, the potential candidates, things of that sort. Another guy that was brought up that we bet on in this spot is Darnell Wright. And I think that he would be a great fit as well. So I think if Carter's gone, the pick's Darnell Wright. But in this instance, Carter's here. So for me, it makes sense for it to be Carter.
Traffic is bad in Chicago, Patrick. Sorry,
I was more worried about, or not worried. I was more looking at the avatar of, what is that, Superman kissing Batman? How did you not notice that? That's what
I did not
trying to look
Oh
at.
boy,
that is
The comment. Just thank you for hanging around, Patrick. But yeah, that's what I was. It's kind of like anime porn.
Sorry to the folks listening in podcasts, but
That's why you watch live.
it's VR, where are you at with the Bears, buddy?
Yeah, it's Jalen. He's got to go. So
I agree, Patrick.
I think the only way he doesn't go here is if the Lions take him at 6 or the Eagles trade up and take him before the Bears.
Yeah, Scott, what are your thoughts on that? Because this is we're in Jalen Carter range, right? This is the floor for sure.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. The only other person that I've seen very well connected to the Bears is what Connor already mentioned. That's Darnell Wright. So those are 2 players that I have locked in here is Darnell Wright and Jalen Carter. And I think if Jalen Carter's there, he's going to be the pick.
All right, Jalen Carter, 9 to the Bears. Now we're at the Eagles with the 10th selection, and I still think that this is especially with the way that the board has fallen, I think this is another great trade out spot. They can do that. They've had a tendency doing that. I think I pushed back on this a little bit. There are a million teams, and we'll kind of get to some as we continue to get down the board that would love to trade out. Just haven't heard of a lot of teams looking to trade up and having not identified players or situations to trade up for. But I'll let you get started here, Daigle, on 10 to the Eagles.
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't call my name because it's literally just who's highest on the big board, and I'm still trying to figure it out.
We'll kick it to VR. VR's got thoughts here.
Good.
Oh yeah, Skoronski here for me. It just makes a ton of sense. I think the only way, like Eagles O-line, been on it for months, where unless Bijan falls, I guess, or Jalen falls, would be the only 2 scenarios, or Skoronski going. Not even making it here. But they got 2 offensive linemen in Kelsey and Lane Johnson, who will probably be, or at the twilight of the year, is probably like 1 to 2 years left. They do need a guard. You bring Skoronski in, you throw him in at guard. But when Lane Johnson retires, let's just say, you move him over. It just makes so much sense. He is the best offensive lineman in his class. The only reason people are knocking him because his arms aren't long enough. And yeah, I don't even know if Skoronski's going to get here.
He's light. I mean, he is light. That's why they're knocking him.
Light, like weight?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For an NFL tackle, 314 is pretty small.
Okay.
Compared to the rest of these guys, yeah.
I would say the arm length is like the top narrative that you hear about him in terms of not being a tackle. And I guess his weight too, which is fair. But I just think the Eagles O-line is, with Skoronski, it just makes too much sense if Bijan and Jalen are off the board. I guess they can think about Christian Gonzalez, or he already went, didn't he? Yeah, he did.
Yeah, we put him to the Raiders.
Yeah, so I think O-line Skoronski makes a ton of sense for me.
Yeah, I don't hate it. My only pushback to that would be similar to what Scott did earlier when we were talking about later picks too. Like there are some tackles that'll probably be available to them when they pick again at 30, or some guards and looking for a guard in the short term. There will be some guards I think that could be available in that range as well, just as a matter of if they've identified another position, because I do think that that's something they'll want to address with some of this early capital. So I'm good there with Skoronski. Shout out to the chat. The Quentin Johnson thing. This is PFF's rankings. These are not my rankings. I know Quentin Johnson's going to be hanging out for us here for a while in terms of him showing up as one of the next guys on the board.
He'll get drafted.
He'll get drafted, but you know, he's well, I mean,
we'll get there eventually. We'll get there.
But yeah, he's it's funny that he's there. So I'm going to go, this is a take that I lean on VR's sourced information. I think it's fine. Shout out to Maine West's finest here. Peter Skoronski going 10 to the.
What does Scott think about that? I want to hear his opinion.
Yeah, I'm actually like lock in step with this. Just the same thought process that you've had is what I've heard. When you start listening and looking at multiple different reports on Skoronski, it's that he is the most finished product, most NFL ready of the offensive linemen that you have here. You have the kickback on his arm length and things of that nature, and he may not have the ceiling that some of the other tackles have, but as far as like plugging him in and ready to play, and then you look at where the Eagles have faltered, you know, with Lane Johnson being injured and whatnot, I think this is the pick that's going to basically help them be one of the teams that can be more steady down the line towards the end of the seasons and not have to be so concerned about Lane Johnson being hurt.
I've heard some pushback. I've heard some pushback too on the arm length thing in terms of offensive linemen, where I think it more is in like that threshold has dropped a handful of times over the last couple of years. I think it's more in play typically you see in terms of like edge rushers or defensive linemen. Obviously you don't want like a full on T-Rex here, but like it's more like footwork is going to be, I think, more important to teams, especially in this instance where Skoronski is like just over somewhat of an arbitrary threshold in terms of what the arm length thing is. So the footwork is kind of through the roof, and, you know, footwork and hands, you know, I think end up being a lot more important in terms of, more of a football take there. What do you got, Tagle?
He did play all 5 positions at Northwestern too. So like whether, like VR was saying, even if he's not viewed as the short-term replacement for Lane Johnson, just to mix in, they will likely try to find a spot on the interior line to start him. So I think he's a day one starter. Yeah, I was just playing devil's advocate.
He could even be like a center in the future, where I think he's a Duke Mayweather, which is like probably like one of the higher regarded offensive line. Like I think he has like an O-line school that it's like regarded as one of the highest. And he has been pumping Skoronski, I want to say, for like the last 2 weeks. And when you can see him pumping a specific guy, because I do know like his Duke Mayweather on Twitter, his opinion is like so highly regarded. You could like his rankings are kind of like McGill's, but for like offensive line. And he's been pumping Skoronski.
All right, so we are at 11. This is a spot where we think we've kind of had the end of the Anthony Richardson slide here, Connor. What are your thoughts or any pushback on finding a home for Richardson here at 11?
No, I think Richardson's the pick here if he falls. I think that there's a chance that they trade up. They're a natural trade partner with the Cardinals. I think that they had already sent out an offer to the Cardinals previously. It just wasn't enough for them to pull the trigger right away. And then given all the uncertainty at 1 and 2 that we've seen the last few weeks, it makes sense for them not to move. I still think they're live to move up to 3-4, a guy like Richardson or Stroud potentially, depending on how the board shakes out. But yeah, I mean, they need other stuff. Like if I was them, I would not be picking Anthony Richardson. They need everything else, but in this instance, and from what we've heard, I think that they would go Richardson.
Scott, any pushback on Richardson here?
Yeah, no pushback on Richardson here. The one thing that I have heard recently over this last week from a source in Nashville was that they are more likely to trade down and acquire more picks, or even trade up into the first round and take Hendon Hooker, than they are to move up to 3 to go ahead and take a quarterback there. So that's one thing that I have been hearing. But with the way the board falls here, anything Richardson to 11, I think you can lock it in.
Yeah, it gets, again, more challenging to find a home for him too after this doesn't happen. So we'll slot him in there.
If Levis doesn't go 2, Richardson's going probably top 5. Like if Levis goes 4 or 4, then this is when Richardson can make it, or Stroud could make it to 11. Literally, I think Richardson's future is based off the number 2 pick, 100%. Like he's not going to go at number 2, but basically where he gets drafted is based off what the Texans do it too.
Yeah, a little bit 4, right? Because I'm in the mindset I was on the wrong side of the vote, but I would have put him at 4 for the Colts, and that based off of a little bit of what we've heard. So I feel pretty good.
But if he doesn't go 2, then he'll be passed over at 4, Levis wise. But if Levis does go 2, then he's got a coin flip to go 4, and then the bottom falls out.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah, Levis would get him.
We have a great poll here in our 4-4 Discord. What does VR love most? 1, draft props, or 2, his vape pen? I think that's a good good little poll that was started there. So I don't know, VR, you wanna answer that?
Equal.
We're 420 adjacent. Are we just hitting the blueberry? What are we?
Dude, I don't even know what day it is right now.
It's my guy. That's my guy. All right, back to the Texans. Their second pick, number 12 overall. A name we've talked about, makes a lot of sense here, Scott. And I'd love to get your thoughts. And you kind of look at where Nolan Smith's line is. He's basically lined at 12.5, under as minus 250, something close to that. We've talked about him earlier. Feels like a really good spot. Again, you could say, hey, maybe they want to add an edge rusher because they didn't do that at 2 based off of what we did earlier. Or maybe you want to get a toy for your new quarterback as well, considering that Brandon Cooks is gone. You, Scott, at 12, what do you think about the Texans?
Yeah, I think when you go here and you start looking at Will Levis, where we have him there at 2. Actually, I just looked a little while ago. Nolan Smith's at 10.5 now is where his line's gotten moved to. I have 3 players here that I would have under consideration: Nolan Smith, Lukas Van Ness, and then Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think those are kind of the 3 players that would be here, provided that they do take a quarterback there up top. And I'd probably lean Nolan Smith here in this pick right here, just based upon some of the information I've heard. I've actually heard that of all the prospects that we've gotten information on, that Nolan Smith has had one of the cleanest interview processes as far as teams liking him and him coming off as a generally good guy that teams can really pull for him, that they think he'll be a foundational piece and just a leader in the locker room. So that's some of the information I've got on him. And just you look at what he's able to do with the speed. A lot of analysis tend to think he's like a Lawrence Taylor type. The way he had the production wasn't there at Georgia, but his size and speed and what he's been able to do throughout this pre-draft process, I think puts him in this position.
Even at the dude has the most charisma I've ever seen. He even the glasses, everything about him, from the glasses to just his answers for everything. And the only thing you need to see is when he ran that 40 at the combine, and you see that clip that went viral of all of his teammates going nuts when they saw the 40 time. That just tells you everything you need to know.
He's got Riz.
His teammates still at Georgia went berserk as if they won 100-1 bet. Yeah, I love that kid.
I can confirm that 4.3940 was also run on St. Elmo State because I was at the table directly next to him that night.
W Riz, Connor?
Yeah, W Riz, no cap, bro, no cap.
I'm lucky to have a 15-year-old because a couple weeks ago I had no idea what that was, and then I had to press my son to figure out what that is. Any thoughts, Connor, or anyone that wants to push back on Nolan Smith?
The one thing that Jeremiah, that tweet that he had a couple days ago, the tweet he had a couple days ago, the perfect fits for the Texans or whatever it was. And I think he had Stroud and then he had Van Ness, which you assumed that Van Ness would be like his selection for 12. Which of course, whenever Jeremiah says literally anything, you want to pay attention, which I don't know if that was personal opinion or what, but like I agree. But that's the only thing I think about Texans. I think Zero Line might have had Van Ness here too, but that was weeks ago.
I'll throw out one galaxy brain. This is the hardest I've galaxy brained all draft season. And I'm just saying, if the Texans get a deal done with Trey Lance and the 49ers that involves the number 12 overall pick, I think we're on the lookout for Quentin Johnson here for the Niners, simply given that they have one type of receiver they draft. And although Quentin Johnson may be the biggest receiver in this class, he also was top 10 among Power 5 receivers and yards after catch per reception last year. Also 7.7 yards after catch per reception in his career. He's actually not Julio Jones, although he's the size. He's actually Brandon Ayuk, just doesn't look like it. He's very bad at contested catches. So that's all I'm saying. Like if we galaxy brain that, especially with Brandon Ayuk's deal and him reportedly trying to be traded right now, that's where I come to at this stage.
I would not like that, but would you rather have Levis and Nolan Smith or Anderson or Tyree? And I don't even know who they'd take if they went D-line here. They'd probably trade back up.
It's
we would
hard.
assume. But like, if you compare the two, you can have Levis, who they have at the top, or Nolan Smith, and let's just say Tyree and JSN. Like I would take Levis. I don't think Van Ness or Nolan is that far off from Tyree in terms of elite.
Yeah, because then you still have Davis Mills, right? So
which supports Levis going to.
Yeah.
But
all right, Nolan Smith. So 12, I think, is of us doing a secondary mock draft, and maybe we could do that. 12, I think, is kind of where we start to get, interesting. So I'll recap for listeners real quick. Bryce Young, 1 overall to the Panthers. Will Levis, 2 to the Texans. We went with Tyree Wilson, 3 to the Cardinals. CJ Stroud, 4 to the Colts. Will Anderson falls down to Seattle at 5. Devon Witherspoon, 6 to the Lions. Christian Gonzalez next to the Raiders at 7. Bijan finds his home in Atlanta. Jalen Carter all the way down to 9 to Chicago. Peter Skoronski, 10 to the Eagles. Anthony Richardson slides all the way down to the Titans at 11. Nolan Smith at 12. Again, some of the early decisions around 2, 3, 4 starts to have a massive trickle-down effect all the way down, I think, to pick 12. A little bit further probably, but I think that's really where kind of is the line of demarcation in terms of the variance at the top and how it trickles down.
Right. From betting perspective, like Levis going 2 is pushing everyone up. So like based off of our top 12, a lot of overs are hitting. I think it would be like Gonzalez is under hit, Skoronski's under hit, then you got Anderson's over hitting, where he's like pushing everyone up that the lines really aren't, for someone like Anderson isn't factoring in, I guess, totally. But
yeah, no, good point for sure. All right. Betting markets will have the first position taken for the Jets. Offensive lines like minus 300 or so. Scott, feels like a layup. Don't believe this pick is going to be involved in anything Aaron Rodgers related, which is pending, but not to be sure yet. But as of now, we'll make this pick in terms of it being the Jets. What are your thoughts on the Jets selection and some of the offensive linemen, I think?
Yeah, I tend to think it's definitely going to be offensive linemen. There was a little bit of smoke throughout this process that they do like Nolan Smith a lot, should Nolan Smith fall. But the players that they've had the most access and most connections with, Broderick Jones and Paris Johnson here. Darnell Wright's also another player that we haven't hit yet. So I think it could be any one of those 3. Just looking through, and it looks like Broderick Jones has really been the player that they've had the most meetings with of the big offensive linemen. So I think there's a spot here where he could definitely be the pick.
VR, what do you think? You've obviously had some Paris Johnson Jr. steam in the last 48 hours or so. He's still here on the board at 13. What do you think the Jets like?
Yeah, I mean, out of like the 40-ish mock drafts I track, like 95% of them have them going O-line here, which I think the only way it's not O-line or is if, I don't even know, like Jeremiah, who is LVP so far based off mock drafts because his last one was like 2 months ago, has them going Nolan Smith. But yeah, Paris Johnson falling is something that like I don't think they might like. Maybe they're expecting it, but at least a lot of the mock drafts that we're seeing have him going way before that. So I would agree, Broderick, but you have to wonder who they have higher between Paris. Where if you look at like big boards, Jeremiah, McShay, and Brugler have Paris. Like I think that he's ranked like 18 on their board, and then when you look at like the athletic consensus, he's in like the top 10, and then Broderick is like 2 or 3 slots behind Paris, so it's not like they're that far off, where they would just automatically go Paris over Broderick. Broderick's fun.
Yeah, it feels like the offensive line classes was like 2019, 2018, was it, where there was like the 4 tackles that were all considered, top 15 picks, and then basically the order was fluctuating so much on the weeks leading up to the draft.
The last thing, Jeremiah's 2 interviews he has had this week with Schrager, and then he had one with Russillo. He like his confidence level, from what I picked up in the context, like it might have been his opinion, but he's discussed D-line both times.
He did.
Where I don't think he defaulted to offensive line, but like defaulting to offensive line from what I picked up in his context doesn't feel like it should be like a minus 250 lock. Like I wouldn't go and lay Jets offensive line first position at that juice whatsoever. And he's the Jets plug, as everyone knows. So,
Dale, any thoughts here? Protecting Aaron Rodgers, who seems inevitable at this point, seems like a good move to make. Mekhi Becton's been really hard to trust the last couple of years. Again, we're getting early best shape of his life from him, which is we typically get that in late summer, but we'll be getting that in the late winter for Mekhi Becton. But any thoughts on the Jets or breaking up this bunch of tackles?
In my first mock, I simply went off of Darnell Wright's athleticism just to run a 4.7 40 at 6'5", 333. That's reminiscent of the whole reason they drafted Mekhi Becton for just being the most athletic offensive tackle in that class. So I lean still on Wright, but I also think this is where the dark horse is coming to play. This should be the first time you're hearing Broderick Jones and Anton Harrison's name is right here at 13.
And McGill's offensive line piece yesterday was somewhat of a tough scene for Darnell, which I know, I think it's Jalen or Darnell at 9, but if Darnell doesn't go at 9, he might fall a bit, where McGill's piece was like, it was basically like these anonymous scouts, quote unquote, saying he like just doesn't try, he doesn't live up to his potential, his work effort. Like it's all of like the red flags that you just don't want to hear when you get this close to the draft. That could, but at the same time, to fall off on tackle, like he's going to go in this range, but
you're telling me
things that are like differentiators where he's going 9 if Jalen is gone.
Yeah. The same guy who is sliding into reporters' DM saying like he's talking shit about him and things like that. And also his character concerns. Like what a surprise. Like I couldn't have guessed that right. Same guy doesn't try hard or whatever, has other issues.
I forgot
that's a tough scene.
It was a disaster, but yeah, I would say, Paris Johnson's still on the board here. I think that I would probably pick him, but otherwise, if he's not, I would think Darnell Wright or, I think any of the offensive linemen. So Noonan or whoever, if you have a strong take, that's fine. But I think any of them there.
I think we go with the higher rated offensive lineman, which is Paris Johnson.
Sure.
Like I said, Broderick Jones has been the offensive lineman that's been most connected there to the Jets. But with the way our board's fallen, I would say go ahead and select Paris Johnson.
All right, New England at 14, another team that has, first of all, when you have drafted a quarterback just a couple of years ago at basically the same position on the list of needs here at PFF, the first thing they have listed is quarterback. That's not a great spot to be. I also feel like that's a little unfair to Mac Jones, based off of the obviously coaching situation and all the drama going on last year in New England and whatnots. But again, another team that's very hard to peg. Go back to the Cole Strange thing last year. They very much have their own board. It looks very different than most other teams, so they're very hard to pin down in terms of need. It's not typically their thing anyway, but they do have a plethora of needs here as well, VR. Any feel for New England? And again, the thing that we've talked about the last few weeks is some of what we heard from our friend Brett Coleman talking about the Zay Flowers, is the worst kept secret, him being on the Patriots radar. I don't know if that's a trade back spot. This feels a little rich, but what are your thoughts on New England?
It feels a little rich for me with Zay, and I think they've had meetings with Jaxon as well, which I think they're I just don't think they should be allowed to draft wide receivers. Like their privileges on drafting wide receivers have been removed. But like if Gonzalez falls, he's auto here. I think it's too rich for Zay. Jaxon makes a lot of sense, I suppose. Where like the amount of times I've looked at the Patriots like first position odds and just wanted to like blindly bet the three that have the highest odds because no one has a clue. Like I think there's worse bets than that. I would probably default to JSN here. Like I don't, if he doesn't go here, I think he might go at 15. I think they've had meetings with JSN, and you got the Boston College connections, and being in Massachusetts, it's probably a lot easier to meet with someone that lives in Boston multiple times than someone that lives in Ohio. But yeah, I would probably go JSN here if Gonzalez is gone and one of the top tackles is gone, or Broderick.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they signed Riley Reif. It's a 1-year deal. They don't have, outside of, starting next year, they don't have a tackle in terms of, like a set player that's a tackle because, they love swing guys that they can move from guard out to tackle and back and forth. They don't really have a tackle on the roster next year. Daigle, get your thoughts on New England here at 14.
I still believe it is Zay Flowers, the number one wide receiver on their board. But if they do not feel it necessary to take a wide receiver just yet, I think they just go back to their natural tendency, although they've only drafted one cornerback in the first round in the last 16 years, I think it is. And that was Devon McCourty, a Hall of Famer. I still think they are leaning likely offensive line or cornerback. And in this case, I'll go to a two-way cornerback and either Deonte Banks or not Emmanuel Forbes.
JPJ.
Porter.
Yes, Porter. Yes, Porter, because both played on punt returns. Porter played on punt return coverage for 4 seasons in college. Banks only entered special teams in his last year, but he still has the experience. So that's just kind of the way I lean with their coaching staff.
Connor, any thoughts on New England?
I had Zay in my latest mock, but it's definitely something I don't feel good about. I just personally don't feel good about anything, honestly, with New England. Just it feels like, I don't know. Have we ever had the pick for New England, right? Like ever? It's like, has one person ever been like, oh, I'm confident they're going to pick this position, even the position wise? Like, I don't think there's been no like plugged in. Like we have that for the Texans. We have that for the Jets, Cardinals. We have a guy who like, oh, they're always at least nailing the position. Never had it for the Patriots. So for me, it's just like a toss up. I would just vote we can do whatever, but I would lean Zay or an offensive lineman.
Yeah, I kind of lean Darnell right based on the way that our board is gone because I feel like he has. Again, think about some of the traits or the things that we know New England does. They like versatility. They like guys that can be pliable in terms of needs. You got a guy that can play left tackle, that can play right tackle. Let's play a little bit of guard. Played it in the SEC. I feel like that's a play for them. And again, I think the Riley Reif thing is not super exciting. Orlando Brown, they kind of need some help there outside of him. So this is the problem: is that we've all landed on different spots for the Pats.
And like you can't assume this, but like if a lot of the guys in the top 13 that we just drafted, like the Patriots are like the backstop for them. Like if Gonzalez falls, he's going there. If Skoronski falls, he's going there. JSN technically might be falling, could go there. So this is kind of like if people are falling, this is as far as they can probably go in terms of like the top 13 guys, I guess you could say.
Yeah, but this year's Mike Reese is going to say that Darnell Wright has like one bad game, and then he's going to slide into Mike Reese's DMs and start, trying to fight with him, and then he's going to end up getting dropped by the Patriots. So, I mean, I would not actually, but I would lean towards like Broderick Jones or like, someone a little bit, I don't know.
I mean, Branch is even
less of an
live
animal.
here.
I don't know.
I lean towards the pick that makes the least sense in Zay Flowers. So that's what I'm doing.
That's
Go
fair.
for it. That's fair.
We didn't get Scott's
As Noonan
thoughts.
cries.
I would tend to lean either Broderick Jones or Jaxon Smith-Njigba. They've had private meetings with both of those guys. They've really, when you include Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, and some of the other wide receivers, they've met heavily with wide receiver across the board. But then you can even start looking at some of the defensive ends and Myles Murphy and Lukas Van Ness. Like I said, I think when you start looking at things, nobody had Cole Strange in the first round of any mock drafts that I saw last year, and that was their pick. So, like, it's a prime spot for them to trade back, pick up extra picks. If they stay at the pick, I think they have to pick the best player off the board, and I think that would be Jaxon Smith-Njigba right here. If not, I would lean Broderick Jones.
All right, I lean Broderick Jones. I'm going to give it JSN because there are multiple votes for him, and no one else got multiple votes. So JSN would surprise me, if I'm being honest. But again, every time the Patriots even make a pick, I'm surprised. Sorry, I thought you had. I thought VR was coming in with a thought there.
Oh no!
All right,
good.
Packers
live is all it was.
Packers at 15. Another team that could go a lot of ways. Another spot that JSN has been discussed. Solid offensive line, but they could use some edge rushers. They definitely have a type in terms of guys that they like to bring in. Scott, any nuggets on the Packers in terms of visits, or what are your thoughts here on Green Bay?
Yeah, I think when you start looking at Green Bay, they're definitely a traits-based team in the way that they draft. The two players that I have a feeling that have the most fit here would be Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, but they've always tended to draft, wide receiver in the second round. It would be great to see them like go ahead and trade Rodgers and then be like a big FU to Rodgers. Hey, we're taking a wide receiver to give Jordan Love some help. But I've been told that this is a spot for Lukas Van Ness, that this may be like his bottom. He fits what they typically draft, and I've been told that if he gets to this position, he'll be the pick.
It looks like a Packer.
Yeah,
big Iowa, big white corn-fed edge rusher. Connor, what are your thoughts on the Packers or the Van Ness thoughts? Because that was a pretty strong take from Scott.
Oh, I had him there in my latest mock as well. So definitely, I'm willing to lock it in there with Scott for sure. What's his over under right now? VR is like 18 or something like that? Is it really good?
Van Ness 12 and a half.
12 and a half.
It was like 10 and a half this morning, and it finally moved to 12 and a half, but the over is still unbettable.
I've just have not even been paying attention to half these over unders because there's like one place you can bet on them like half the time. So it's like not even worth our time.
I can confirm they'll let you get $7.50 down on it. So
Caesar's a little bit better. Caesar's typically let you get down a little bit.
I do agree with Van Ness. Like this is like the first spot that a tight end could go, but like everything, like it feels like there's a red flag coming out of the tight ends every day. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we're gonna go Van Ness here.
I have the 6 guys written down who fit their thresholds with first round projections, and in order it is Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, Lukas Van Ness, Darnell Wright, Michael Mayer, Nolan Smith, and Broderick Jones. So if your mock does not include one of those 6 guys, you are wrong.
Here's the problem: they're almost all available, right? So
no, I'm not saying. I'm just saying
you
better pick one of those 6. I'm not saying which one. I have no idea, no clue.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think that
those are the 6 threshold guys right there.
Yeah. Rashawn Gary's getting up there in age, had some injury issues. They don't have a lot of young edge rusher depth on the roster. So don't hate that pick whatsoever.
We're definitely in Michael Mayer watch starting at 15.
I agree. Scott, I'm going to go back to you here. 16. This is your squad, the Commanders. You've been plugged in here and have some thoughts on the Commanders. What do you got?
So, yeah, they've had multiple visits with Joey Porter, but they've also had multiple visits with Darnell Wright. I think they desperately need a primary, cornerback there. That secondary is struggled, for years. I think that they would come to a position where it'd be hard for them to pass up on Joey Porter. But here recently over the last week, I've actually heard that they may have a higher grade on Deonte Banks. So I think both of those guys would be in play. Ultimately, I think a lot of people, and we talked about Darnell Wright has fallen throughout our mock draft. And when you look upon that offensive line, they've made some plays in free agency. They're going to go ahead and be moving and shuffling that offensive line around with Wiley and then like some of the other players moving into guard. I just think they don't have a premier player along that offensive line. We talked a little bit about Bijan Robinson possibly being in play for this as being a smoke screen. But look, that team wants to run the ball. That's what they want to do. They have a second-year quarterback, and they're going to be trying to figure out what they're going to do on offense. And I think if they want to run the ball and they want to go ahead and give their quarterbacks as much possibility of being able to stand upright in that pocket throughout the year, I think this is a spot where I could see Darnell Wright going.
All right, Daigle, any thoughts on the Commanders?
At the beginning of the show, Astronaut mentioned, imagine being confident about this draft. And he wasn't talking to any of us directly, But I will say that my job is literally to have educated opinions, although sometimes they come from different directions, sometimes hard stances, sometimes just laughing. But yeah, I do the research and I have opinions. But there are 3 people who make me stop down anytime because I respect their work, especially during draft season so much.
Thanks,
One
buddy.
is Ben Standig of Washington. One is Scott Smith. And the other is Evan Silva pre-2023. So honestly, when Scott Smith discusses knowing who he believes Washington will take, I stop and listen. So I have Broderick Jones, but if Scott's telling me Darnell Wright over Broderick Jones, I'm absolutely listening.
The funny thing is, I'll be on Monday on a show with Established Run with both of those other 2 guys. So
They're both my best friends. It's okay. He knows I'm kidding. It's no big deal.
Scott, did you know the Cubs are 11-7?
Silva will tell you.
Those are the texts we get right
Season
now.
ticket holder will tell you.
look, I just can't wait to get on that show for the Michael Mayer slander on Monday.
Oh, that's so good.
Literally, while we're live on show, Silva, old enough to remember when the Cubs were the top 5 team in baseball. Long live the Ricketts.
Yeah, we all got that text right there. Yep.
Right on cue.
Yeah, previous version, he'd probably be on this show, but he's got more important things to do, like sweating April baseball. So we'll go Darnell Wright again with the conviction, thanks to Scott, and I think a sigh of relief a little bit from VR with not landing Joey Porter Jr. There to the Commanders is kind of, I think, the dead spot there. And I'll let you get started, VR, with the pick to the Steelers.
Yeah, so I mean, we have like the mock drafters that we all know are like connected to teams like Jeremiah to the Jets, Zerline to the Cardinals, but then we also have Mike Tomlin, who like every single year, like we just know, like everyone knows who he is going to be drafting, and they always take him. Where this year we don't really have as much of an idea, which kind of makes the whole trading up scenario where they like Gonzalez, I suppose, like seem more realistic because you don't know who Tomlin's going to take by now. Like maybe the trade is actually going to be happening. But based off of like their visits, I would probably go Anton here. I think they visited like the favorites based off their visit. It should be like Anton, Bryce, Ringo. Just like looks like just feels like a Steeler to me. But this would be too rich. Who knows? But Anton has been in the second round. I want to say the last 2 months and the last week or two, like he's becoming like more and more and more almost to like a certainty to go in the first round. And based off we know about who Tom was met with and that's like the blueprint on who he always takes. Anton here makes a lot of sense. I know Joey Porter has the connections. They have a need at corner. I think Banks goes before Porter. So to me, it would be either Anton or Banks. But after Anton, the fall off at tackle is steep. And I think you can wait on corner. So I'll just take the tackle, knowing I got one of the top end tackles and worry about corner in the second round because they had the first pick in the second round as well.
Yep, no, that's a great point. They picked 32, so they're at the top of the board there, and it looks like they'll probably be able to address both. But I kind of agree with you. I do think it's probably easier to address corner there than it will be to address at least an offensive tackle. Scott, you've had some nuggets recently, or at least have had some teams discussing kind of where they are ranking these remaining cornerbacks, and maybe some having a preference that's been a little bit off the board in comparison to where the market's been.
Forbes.
Yeah, Forbes is the other one that's up there. Actually, look, being projected and having a lot of connections there with the next team in Detroit. But the one other pushback on this pick here at Pittsburgh, we still have Broderick Jones on the board.
And
Broderick Jones, yeah, Broderick Jones is a player that they've met with just as much as Anton Harrison. So, like for me, this pick here would be clearly Broderick Jones. I just think he's going to be rated higher on a lot of boards, and I think it's going to be imperative for Pittsburgh if they want to go ahead and take that next step and develop their quarterback to go ahead and get him protected. So I think a tackle here is going to make the most sense. There's a possibility it could lean Anton Harrison, but I think Broderick Jones is the pick.
No, I agree. I totally forgot about Broderick.
Diggle, any thoughts on that?
Broderick, I have ranked higher. Anton, certainly in the conversation here, makes sense. But I think for the sake of this practice, go ahead and put Broderick in.
Yeah.
Connor, any additions?
Should have cut me off.
Nope, totally agree. And but I do think, to your point, if the offensive linemen get pushed up, I think this is like the start of Anton's range, kind of like in this area. So if the board does play out like that, I think that we're starting to see him probably go in this area. Noonan, I know you bet on him to go to the first round pretty early on. The prices are getting blasted, but we'll see what is dropped here in the coming days. So you never know.
And remember, we haven't even got started yet. Like Osiris Torrance is favored to go in the first round. Matthew Bergeron got a nod from Daniel Jeremiah as a first round player. Like night one is the night of offensive linemen. So if like 5.5 or whatever bad number still out there, it's probably juiced heavily, and you could probably only get $7.50 down on it. But it's like the right pick because we're getting like 7 offensive linemen on night one at least.
Yeah.
Devon Jones is another one that's on the border there.
Of course, yeah.
So, yeah, you $7.50, you win enough to buy yourself a Red Bull.
Nothing
for
in Chicago.
rounds 2 and 3.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, parking for an hour. So, all right, for the sake of this, we will we'll slide the offensive lineman Broderick Jones in there. Now we are back to the Lions with their second pick. I think they can go a lot of different ways here. And Connor, I'll start with you. What do you think about the Lions at 18?
Yeah, we had him going Witherspoon. I think if they don't go corner in the first, they're almost certainly going corner with 18. And I think there would probably be in this spot, it would be Banks, Emmanuel Forbes. But in this mock, we have him going corner first. So I think a guy like Kalijah Kancey makes a lot of sense, a defensive tackle potentially for them. I mean, they could really go anywhere. I think like they could be a team that would be interested in maybe a tight end, Michael Mayer, Dalton Kincaid. Obviously I think they're both in play. Personally, I had Kancey, but I think I'm kind of open. But that's kind of like the grouping that I would have there.
Yeah. VR, any thoughts here on second pick for the Lions?
Yeah, I mean, if they go Witherspoon at 6, then the line is definitely in play, maybe even tight end. And if they go someone like Jalen Carter at 6, then someone like Deonte Banks is in play here, or Dre Porter. I think Kancey makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Kancey's tough for me, if I can interrupt you, because I've heard both. Kancey's a guy that I've heard is both like people think he's going to go higher than you think, and then some people are like, no, he's not going to go. He's going to go lower. He's just too undersized, and that's just there's you need a very specific style, coach, system for a guy that undersized at the position, even though he's electric for what he's been able to produce. Scott, any thoughts on Kancey or any thoughts on the Lions here at 18?
Yeah, Kancey's a player that is just polarizing from the fact that you just said. You have analysts and people that are very high on him. I think there's some nostalgia there when you start kind of considering, a certain former Pittsburgh defensive tackle who's been kind of the best player in the league for the last few years. But I'm struggling right now where I'm going to place Kancey, like here in my final mock draft that comes up at the end of the week. But here, the way the board has fallen out, and a player that's rising up the board, and I think would make a lot of sense here is Myles Murphy. There is at edge. His over and under right now is sitting at 18.5. We're here at pick 18. If defensive end with Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson on the edge, they are in play at 6, but they go cornerback at 6 instead. I think, edge is definitely going to be a position that would be here. And I think Myles Murphy's a guy that, has been mentioned as high up as like, the 10-12 range. I think it'd be hard for Detroit to pass on a player like that here at 18.
Yeah, I agree. Is there a board that I'm not a part of that who's still available that I have no idea exists? Because Myles Murphy, 100%, like right here. Like if they go corner, Myles Murphy.
No, unfortunately limited with
Scott's
what
just
this
sharp.
scroll allows me to do.
You're good.
If they are tantalized and go quarterback at 6, I have them taking a cornerback here. But yes, for the sake of this practice, I think in this case they're getting their interior rush or pass rush in general.
Yep.
And there is no
that's my
Master
problem.
Doc
I've kind of
VR.
been reluctant to do. Oh, go ahead.
What are you reluctant about?
Edge rusher to the Lions. They added 3 last year in the draft. I think they like all of them. Do you think using another early asset on edge, I think it's not like you can have too many. Obviously we see the Lions or the Eagles successfully rotate them in and out, but it just seems he's an ascending prospect. I think, he went out and crushed, basically all of his drills and, his RAS score is through the roof. So I get the player being slotted here. I feel like it's just not necessarily a spot that I feel like an interior lineman makes a lot more sense. But again, like doesn't mean they should be drafting for need at all. Just that's my only issue with slotting.
And I think Bryce is live too here. Like I think this is like the one spot that Bryce could go that brings like that doesn't push him back to like the late first. Like if he doesn't go here, he's probably going to go in like the late 20s or second round. Which is like entirely dependent.
Yeah. All right. For the process, we'll go Myles Murphy. Some consensus there. And again, it's a guy that I definitely should be going in this range, closer here, probably not sliding past 20. And we've seen that over under move quite a bit. The Bucs are up here at 19. Another team very, very tough to pinpoint because they have a plethora of needs, no real assurance on what they do. Feels like offensive line would make a lot of sense, but again, we're kind of running out of bodies, but maybe this is a spot where we can go back to the Antoine well. Connor, any thoughts on the Bucs? I don't want to guide your selection and do anything you'd like.
Sorry, my thing wasn't muting there properly. I would go with Banks here. I think that he's been kind of a buzzy pick here, but I think Deontay Banks could be an interesting selection for them. Just tested really well at the combine, been flying up draft boards, and it's kind of been one of the more commonly mocked spots. So I think this is kind of like not the start of his range, but like honestly, I think a pretty meaty part of his range, like right at 19. I know VR considered playing the under. I don't know, maybe for a couple other reasons as well.
Yeah, this is definitely on Banks. Well, I wouldn't have gone corner here. Banks this is prime Banks territory. But like every like Bucs beat writer or like Easterling, he's a Bucs, or he was a Bucs beat writer, who's kind of like faded from like, I want to say like 2 months ago, like Branch was a very like popular pick. And I am still seeing Branch to the Bucs as like somewhat of a no-brainer in the context of like the Bucs beat writers. Or I think Branch is live here. Like Anton, he's like the last like first round talent tackle. I think Anton, like offensive line should be probably the favorite in terms of positional odds. I don't hate Banks. I think this is a prime spot for him, but Anton being like the last tackle, like I'm kind of just sliding Anton or Anton or Darnell, because they're the most common guys to get in here at 19. If it's not Branch for me.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe the top JD of where an Osiris Torres can start to go as well. Maybe a little bit early as well, and guard a little bit harder to swallow than tackle. But what are your thoughts on the Bucs? They can go a lot of ways.
Many ways. That's why it's so hard. They need help though on their offensive line on the interior, especially after the Shaq Mason trade, much more so than tackle. So that's the only reason I don't personally pin a Broderick Jones or anyone there. That's why I lean Osiris Torrance, who again is favored to go in the first round. But yeah, if it was any other position, even tight end, it would not shock me at all. This team has needs everywhere. They're going to compete with the Titans for the worst roster in the NFL, and thus eventually getting Caleb Williams next offseason. So I don't know. Take your pick. Figure out their big board.
And like I feel like teams in this state who are kind of like their future is like drafting a quarterback in the future. Like you see them taking like foundational pieces for that quarterback of the future, like an offensive lineman, which is another reason I think offensive line is in play. Didn't they lose their tackle? What's his name?
Shaq Mason went to the Texans.
Yeah.
I thought they lost someone else. But yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah. I did. I could probably pull up
You're good.
Something right now in my.
Don't look at their depth chart.
Their current starting lineup is disgusting. I mean, their current starting offensive line outside of Tristan Wirfs, is a complete disaster. And
if they trade one of Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, Evans is being loomed larger in the rumor mill, then this offense depth chart looks similar to Arizona's defensive depth chart. It's literally just trash.
All right, we're gonna give him Anton Harrison. Even though I kind of agree with Daigle, I do think guard's more of a need. They have holes everywhere, and they can do anything to take the better position. Guy started as a freshman in the Big 12 at left tackle, and I think allowed one pressure in all of his 400 plus drop back passing snaps last year. Has been pretty talented kid. So I like that he's ascending up the board.
I will say this about Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has held more meetings and met with more players than any other team here in the NFL this year. But this is also a team that heavily drafts off of players that they've had, official meetings with, whether it be at the combine, a top 30 visit, or a pro day. This is a team, when you start looking off of their list, start targeting and looking at some of the players that they've had meetings with, and Anton Harrison falls into that category there.
They lost Donovan Smith. Yeah, they did lose.
That's it. Yep. Thank you, Kenny Pope.
Is that who said? Oh, I was Googling that. Thanks, Kenny.
Or Kenny Pops. Yeah.
There we go.
I think Noonan's on mute.
I can never tell if it's mute or internet. There you go.
That's totally fine. Totally fair. We're back to the Seahawks at 20. We gave them Will Anderson the first time around at pick 5. This time it was mute. Fair question. And I'll start with you, Dago. What are your thoughts on Seahawks pick 20?
It depends, like a lot of these teams, what they do with their first pick. And so who did we have for the Seahawks at 5 in this draft?
Will Anderson.
So they can't go edge here. Thus, I think their next needs are wide receiver. They're not doing a quarterback after the big 4. Yeah, so I guess I just have wide receiver. I don't know, Scott. I have to kick it to you. I haven't even toyed around with outside of an edge at 20 for Seattle, honestly.
Yeah, I think defensive back is in play here. I think you could see a guy like Brian Branch or Deontay Banks or even, Joe Porter Jr. I think all 3 of those are in play. I tend to lean a little bit more towards the wide receiver with Zay Flowers possibly being the pick. So that's more of the range that I'm looking. I think some of the players that would have to fall to them to really consider edge would be like a Lukas Van Ness, a Nolan Smith, like Myles Murphy, some of those guys. But, with the way the board is, I think we're looking at either wide receiver or cornerback here.
Connor, any thoughts on a corner in terms of, I guess the Seahawks in terms of a receiver there, a preference with, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, anything like that?
Yeah, I put corner in my last mock, but I just because they did so well drafting corners, like kind of later in the draft, kind of gives me hesitance that like maybe they think that they don't necessarily need to go with a corner here in the first round. Like I don't know. I kind of been wavering on it a little bit. So I'm fine with the receiver here. If you guys want, I had Joey Porter Jr. there. I think both he and Banks are, I don't know, not maybe slightly overdue, but I think this is like a good spot for them as well. So yeah, I would probably put one of them, but kind of fine with whatever.
I think Will McDonald is live here if they don't go edge at 5. But I also think like Torrance is live as well, interior offensive lineman, which isn't like a glaring need, but this is his range. They do need help there. I think Torrance is live. I think one of the corners is live. I think one of the wide receivers is live. It really is like so dependent on, because there's going to be like, this is a great spot for edge rushers too. And it's going to be dependent on whether they get Tyree or Anderson or go quarterback.
If it is cornerback, I will say, remember, Seattle has historically prioritized length, and Joey Porter Jr. literally has the 5th highest wingspan in the last 2 decades among all cornerbacks.
And like those guys would be considered falling now. Like Joey Porter's like range is probably in like the 15, 16. So like you'd assume like if Porter's in the 20s, like that might be a guy that like they would consider themselves like lucky to have and at the top of their board relative to the guys we have now.
34-inch arm length to be exact.
He's a praying mantis.
Yeah, it's a good sell on Joey Porter Jr. We'll make him the selection here to keep the train rolling. Connor's Dolphins don't get a pick because they cheated. We'll move on to the Chargers at 21. They have a number of needs. This is a team that's been, we talked about the connection with Jordan Addison's former wide receiver coach, Chris Beatty, who was with him at Pittsburgh, is now on the staff of the Chargers. That makes a lot of sense. And again, I've talked about it here on the show last week. Scott poked a hole in terms of, team visits. They have not met with a lot of defensive backs, but it is a team need. Do feel that you kind of got that validated for some other smart people a little bit yesterday. Again, this year, Adderley retired, 24-year-old safety retired kind of out of nowhere. And Bryce Callahan, their slot receiver or slot corner, also not coming back due to free agency. J.C. Jackson, they gave a ton of money last year in free agency, sucked when he played, and then got hurt a bunch. So I definitely feel like corner is within the range of outcomes for them, but I do think it comes down to either being honest about wanting to add speed there, VR. Is there anyone here that you think it's receiver that could kind of trump them needing to add anything to the secondary?
The connections with Addison are just too strong to ignore. It just seems like he's one of like the consensus picks in like the mock drafts that you read at this point to the Chargers that just make too much sense if he's there. But I think Cansey's live here. If Kincaid didn't have the red flags, I might go that direction as well. But I like Addison's kind of it just makes too much sense with Addison.
Yeah. Connor, where are you at here?
Yeah, I think I had a Kincaid, but I think that you could go Kincaid, Addison. I thought you penciled in Brian Branch potentially, I believe, correct? I think all those options make sense in this spot. So I think any of those three guys would make a ton of sense. Maybe Michael Mayer over Dalton Kincaid. I mean, maybe they want a guy who can do it all a little bit more, but I would think one of those three guys.
What do you got, JD?
Unless you want to sell me on DB, I think it just makes too much sense with Jordan Addison. Too much sense.
Yeah. I mean, my DB sell is just they don't have
plus odds.
They don't have a slot. They don't have a second safety next to Derwin James because they're young safety retired to pursue other things. And then their big money free agent last year was a problem. Otherwise, like this team has pretty much a turnkey starters on both sides of the ball. Now, Scott poked a hole in it last week by saying they haven't met with anyone at the defensive back position. And I think that that's fair too. I do think there are some teams that I don't know with the Chargers where they fall on the spectrum in terms of we pick off of our meeting list or, it's not necessarily that cut and dry, but I don't disagree with you that the Jordan Addison thing makes a ton of sense. It's a very easy line to draw. Scott, what are your thoughts on the Chargers?
The Chargers aren't necessarily a team that sticks specifically to drafting off of the players that they've met with. But, my main pushback is just from a logical standpoint that this isn't a deep wide receiver draft. We're talking about and poking holes in the guys that are going here in the first. And I just think when you read the tea leaves, there's too many connections with Jordan Addison going there. And then, they do have a deeper secondary, talent here in this draft. So I think they're going to go and add a pass catcher and continue to build around Justin Herbert, whereas they can go ahead and address some of those other positions there in the second and third.
Kenny Pops asks about Jalen Hyatt in the chat, and I'll just say I wrote up 50 players for our night one draft tracker blurbs, and I did not write up Jalen Hyatt, so I hope not, Kenny. I absolutely hope he's not a first round player because then Jen is going to be scrambling last second.
I'll move on to.
I will say this in relation to Jalen Hyatt. My model, and it's based upon both player evaluations and some of the top mock drafters, has Jalen Hyatt sitting at around pick 33. So 33.8
for comfort. Okay, I may have to go back here and write one more. Got it.
Took us about 50 minutes to get through the first 10 picks. We have about 10 more to go. So we'll be pushing 3 hours. Hope no one has anything to do. We're on to the Ravens at 22. I think the Ravens probably trade this pick, but we're going to pretend they're going to make the pick here because we're not messing around with that. They only have 5 selections, and it's just not typically how they've built their roster. They take some swings and have had a lot of success. Wide receivers in need, edge rushers in need, cornerback is in need as well. VR, what are your thoughts on what the Ravens do here at 22?
So I think if Joy Porter gets here, I think that's run the card out. Receivers in need. I think Banks is also he's technically kind of falling at this point, where them signing Odell doesn't mean they don't need a receiver anymore. I think he just got some type of charges against him. I saw somewhere where one of the receivers, I hope it's not Zay, but with Joey off the board, I would probably pinpoint Banks at this point. If Banks isn't going now, he's probably going to go the very next pick. But at the same time, trading back, no idea what D linemen are still left, but I would probably go with Banks, but that's the bias towards my Zay Flowers bet for what it's worth.
Interior linemen, so Kalijah Cansey's still here, Brian Bresee, we look at how bring in defensive interior. Yeah, it's kind of where we're at. So pretty much only, Can't see in
Per usual, Ravens just take the best player available. That's what happens every
Yeah.
draft. They just get the best
100%.
one.
So where are we going?
I would have it as Banks at this point, probably.
Yeah.
But
I would agree.
I think
Banks
Banks
to
across
fall.
from Marlon Humphrey makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I think the Vikings, again, are another prime team to trade back if they can. They do not have a lot of draft picks, but they do need wide receiver with Adam Thielen moving on and not having really anything next to JJ there. I'll get it started with you, Dago. What are your thoughts on the Vikings if they stay home and pick at 23?
To me, it's either cornerback or wide receiver. And I would think it's Deontay Banks if he's there. But in this case, I think this is where we probably start seeing Emmanuel Forbes being mentioned, who is, I believe, will be a first-round player. I'm pretty confident about that. I will drop Cam Smith out of my first round right now. It could change over the weekend because we'll get a lot of news, but that's where I stand right now. So, yeah, I guess I'll go Emmanuel Forbes personally.
Okay. VR, that's your guy. And this works in Minnesota since he plays half of his games indoors where he's not in jeopardy of blowing away in the winds due to his very, 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 very slender frame. But is this the range where we start getting into your boy Forbes?
Buddy, the slenderest.
Very
I
small.
totally agree. I can see Forbes going ahead of the two other guys where, like, I think if Banks, Porter, or Addison follow them, like, they're just easy. But if those three guys are off the board, or those three are off, then Forbes makes a ton of sense.
And by the way, if Forbes went man-on-man against Quentin Johnston, Forbes is winning that 10 out of 10 times. Like, he has so much more dog than Johnston does. Like, Forbes is shutting him down, dude.
You know, I'm a big
He
dog.
plays
Guy.
210. He plays huge.
Scott, where are you at here with the Vikings?
Yeah, I think Forbes or Zay Flowers is definitely to pick. Forbes is a guy that hasn't been on a ton of mock drafts, but here he's been getting some steam lately. I think he's in play from 18 on, and even if you go back to one of Mel Kiper's earlier mock drafts, he had Forbes like projected there to Washington at 16, so he could even be in play there at 16 on down. So I think this is a good spot for him. I think he's a player that I don't know what the odds are right now, but I think you definitely have to go ahead and bet him being in the first round.
Starting to capitulate a little bit. There was not a Forbes. The tape's actually good, but I mean, you get into like,
It's amazing.
Yeah, but you get into like, pick sixes and stuff like that. Is that dude getting involved in, any sort of run support? He's just probably not. And then again, that's not his job. We've had some great corners in the league that have not been very active in the run game.
He might try, but I don't know if he's going to survive.
Yeah, I'm sure the coaches are hoping he doesn't put his nose in anything there too. It'd be hard for me to think that they pass on Zay Flowers here, but I'll go with Emmanuel Forbes for you guys.
You think Joe Judge looks at pick sixes and thinks the same thing as you, that they're complete luck? No.
I'm not saying that they're complete
Joe
luck.
Judge says this is the best cornerback I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna give him to you. I think that the drumbeat is.
I think both are fine. Zay, yeah.
Yeah,
I think
we'll go with Forbes here. We'll go with Forbes. All right, I feel like we got decently sourced information where this could be the bottom of Brian Branch and where he falls at 24 to Jacksonville. Feel pretty good about that information. They can go a number of different ways, but again, it's more all need based because they are, an ascending roster. VR, any thoughts on Jacksonville?
Yeah, Branch is becoming one of the more consensus picks of the Jags in the mock drafts that you go through, where it seems like every single mock draft you look at has Branch there, which surprise, is over under is 24.5. But I would say Branch or Torrance are probably live here. If Kincaid was, I think, but because of their line, everyone's just pushing him further and further back. But yeah, like Branch is just like, it's tough to find a mock draft without Branch at 6 or at 24.
Scott, any thoughts on the Jags?
Yeah, I tend to lean Branch as well. He's been connected, even by the Jags beat writers. He's one of the top two players that they have. My pushback on Osiris Torrance is that where is he going to play? Is he going to play at tackle or is he going to play at guard? If he's going to play at guard, they already have Brandon Scherf as their right guard. I tend to think that Anton Harrison's a player that would be in play here if he falls here to Jacksonville. I think they're looking at putting some pieces there around. I mean, they still have Cam Robinson playing left tackle. It's not ideal. They've flirted with moving him inside to guard at times. So, with the players that are on board, I would tend to lead Branch here.
Daigle, any thoughts on the Jags?
The numbers I've seen, unless they've been steamed lately, all have Brian Branch at 24.5 over under for a reason. It's because his slide, I would think, certainly stops with Jacksonville. And that's it. So no, if he's here, which is still a big question, as Scott has mentioned, because of Washington, then yeah, he goes at 24.
Yeah. Connor, I'm going to skip you. I'm going to pop Brian Branch in there. And Connor, I'll let you get started with the Giants at 25.
Yeah, I think Zay Flowers is still on the board, right?
Zay Flowers is still on the board.
Yeah, I think he would be like an insta pick for them in this spot.
Now, we've heard some discussion around size, right? Go ahead, VR.
So the one thing that, like, one of the few points that really stuck with me was with the Schrager and Jeremiah collab mock is Schrager said that, which he's notorious for his second to last mock getting reactions. And one of the reactions he got is when he put Zay Flowers to the Giants is he got multiple texts from teams saying that he was crazy putting Zay Flowers ahead of Quentin and that his order was all out of whack, which I would go Zay Flowers here too. When you hear something like that from one of the more connected guys that does mock drafts, it definitely makes you think, because Quentin a month or two ago was going 12 to the Texans. And we could all just be wrong. So
yeah, I mean, McGinn also came out and had him in their McGinn polls. He was second among the wide receivers in the thing among scouts, which is so strange because we've had a month of steam of Quinn Johnson just getting pushed down boards and now even being like a fringe first rounder. And then now we're getting he's actually the second best wide receiver in this class. And like you said, maybe ahead on the Giants board. I think taking Quinn Johnson here is not something I'm able to do, but if you guys really want it, we could do that.
It was a tough scene for Zay too on McGinn.
Yeah,
he was being talked about as like a top 50 pick. Zay Flowers is definitely like the Twitter darling that everyone has a first wide receiver ticket. So everyone's rooting for him to go.
Is Zay Flowers Akeem Butler or no?
No, he's better than that.
The Giants are we sure?
I think he is. The Giants have some Zay Flowers-esque guys on the team. They don't really have a Quentin Johnston. So I think that's kind of the argument there is they don't have that big-bodied perimeter guy, whereas they have 6 slot receivers. Scott, do you have any insight to add to this?
Yeah, I think some of the information that I've heard is that the Giants aren't necessarily prioritizing wide receiver as much as what a lot of people think. I've actually heard that they're prioritizing cornerback and interior offensive line, possibly even with center John Michael Schmitz here at 25, more than what they're prioritizing the wide receiver position. So that's some of the news and stuff that I've been trying to chase down is specifically with this cornerback and interior line market here to the Giants. When you start looking at their roster, I think Quentin Johnson makes more sense than what Zay Flowers would here, just because of what they have. They don't really have that big alpha type of guy. I in my mock drafts, I'm probably gonna go ahead and lean a little bit away from wide receiver here, but I can definitely be outvoted in this position.
And I think if Forbes falls to 25, Forbes, I would probably go Forbes over one of the wide receivers. But if Addison falls, I think he would go as well. This is one of there's a bunch of really trendy positional spots where every mock draft has the Giants going wide receiver, Bengals going tight end, Cowboys going tight end. And this is one of them that I don't think. I think corner. I agree. I think I read one of the beat writers for the Giants was saying that they're not going to force a wide receiver that isn't where he is on their board, and they would take someone like Forbes. So the corners, we're out of corners at this point. So Derek Quinn.
Diggle, we don't have a tight end off the board yet. Then what are we dealing with here with the Giants?
We still don't have a tight end off the board. You can move past that. I think everyone summed it up. They have 5 Zay Flowers on the team, but they have no Quentin Johnsons. I think that makes the pick for them, honestly. If they go wide receiver, I'm open to the idea of John Michael Schmitz. He's pretty much the second player I think they draft here if they don't go Quentin Johnston, but I have Quentin right now.
A center always goes. There's one center every draft, and this is its last chance, I think. Or maybe, probably.
All right, let's go off the board. We'll go JMS. I don't want to have to scroll too far down the board, but here we go. All right, 65th.
Mock drafts are always mental exercises. So
Yeah,
this is
I'm
okay.
okay with
just
it.
to practice things different. Yeah, like again,
It's
Jeremiah
happened.
threw Matthew Bergeron in his draft with Schrager, and he literally just said like, we're just trying things here based on news he heard. So yeah, let's just try something at the back end because the back end gets a little wild.
Yep, for sure it does, and I think that's kind of where this draft is going to be, where there's not a huge difference, say 15 to 50. So it really becomes definitely big board specific. Diggle, will go with you to the Cowboys. Again, this is a spot where we've seen interior defensive line, which I think makes a lot of sense. This is the early sexy Bijan spots. They could use a tight end. Lots of different ways for the Cowboys to go here at 26.
First of all, just a note, Silva is watching a perfect game through 7 innings at Wrigley right now. And so I hope that jinxes his experience. And 2, I would argue there are 2 teams in the NFL who don't pay attention to medicals, and that are the Titans and the Cowboys. So all of this Dalton Kincaid medical news, I pay no attention to. And I think this is where they pull the trigger, knowing that they are in on either a tight end or wide receiver in this range. So I'm still leaning Dalton Kincaid, a first-round player, specifically to the Cowboys.
Scott, where are you at on Dallas?
So I've had Michael Mayer in.
Fair.
I just think Michael Mayer, with his blocking and due to some of the other things with Dalton Kincaid, I tend to think that Michael Mayer is going to be the guy here for Dallas. I just think the way they use their tight ends in line a bit more. I think you're going to see Dalton Kincaid flexed out a bit more. I tend to agree with the tight end position here. I have heard whispers that there is an outside shot that if there's a certain wide receiver here that they could go ahead and take a swing at that, and that would be Zay Flowers. So there is some outside whispers there that's of interest there to them. I don't know how much that's going to go ahead and be with Brandon Cooks now there, but I tend to lean tight end here.
Also, Scott, I will say that at least through reports, over half the league, and I think they're wrong, but over half the league apparently thinks that Michael Mayer is not a good blocker. Like they think that's actually like his weakness. Whenever you watch him on film, though, the dude is so aggressive. Like he may not hold his block, but he wants to block, which is awesome. So I think that may bring him down a little bit.
And our friend Anthony Miko actually brought to the attention that I totally was like forgetting that about the Cowboys. The last 15 years, 14 of the last 15 first-round picks that they've made, they've had a top 30 visit with, which then
that's a good point.
Nick Grosco clarified, fantasy law guy on Twitter, that based off the wide receivers, they would be that we still have available would be Flowers or Quentin.
Okay.
And then we have off tight ends, they've had Darnell Washington in, but they have not had Mayer or Kincaid in.
Okay.
Which we still have Flowers, we still have Quentin, and we still have Darnell.
All right. Maybe it's Flowers then.
Yeah.
I'm not here for Darnell Washington tight end one. Okay. All right, good.
Buddy, we're getting Washington night 1. I hope you know that. We're seeing him in the first round.
I think this is perfect for Flowers.
He's going. He's going.
All right, we're gonna go with Flowers here. Interesting.
I'd love to see that.
I'm gonna put that in my log. Those are good points. Good job, VR and Scott.
All right, Buffalo Bills pick 27. They could use a tackle, they could use a linebacker, they could still maybe use some help along the defensive front as well. Connor, any leans to Buffalo here for you at pick 27?
I mean, at this point, I think that they probably just take. I mean, they're probably going to go best player available. I mean, I know that they did technically re-sign Dawson Knox. I mean, maybe they view Kincaid as a guy who could make a difference for them. Given like a little bit of time. Behind Dawson Knox. I mean, maybe Kalijah Kancey is enough of a difference maker to kind of like come in and, he doesn't need to be relied upon as like the guy. He can kind of just like come in and make a difference at their front. So I would lean towards one of those 2 guys based on the draft shaking out. I mean, these kind of bottom few picks here are smart teams for a reason. And like, they kind of just tend to go with best player available at positions like premium positions. But I would go with one of those 2 guys. If you guys have a strong take though, I'm kind of open to it.
I do think so. In this draft, I think as we get later, team needs are going to come into play way more than in years past because the talent is going to have a drop off, and the best player available is going to be way more up in the air at this point in the draft compared to previous years. And one of the needs for the Bills Future needs will be D-line. 4 out of their 6 defensive linemen have their contracts coming up next year. Ed Oliver might even get traded. So I think D-line is a prime spot here. And I think Mozzie Smith is a great fit. Bryce is another one that you can see, which Bryce is very dependent on whether they re-sign Ed Oliver. But Mozzie Smith, I think this is a perfect spot for a need that isn't glaring now, but D-line is going to be glaring next year. And the best teams draft ahead of the needs, which that would be a perfect spot right here for Mozzie Smith, I think. And I don't think that's crazy.
No, I don't need it. We have kind of 3 here, right? We have Smith, Brian Breezy, and then Kalijah Cansey. And Scott, you've been adamant about, or not adamant, but we've had discussions around like how teams rate in like where you came in terms of coming in out of high school and what that looked like, and basically your pedigree. And Brian Breezy was like, I believe, a consensus like top 5 player in his class when he came out. Do you think that that's a factor here in terms of tiebreakers, or when teams get close to a decision like this? Does that kind of factor in, or is that more team specific?
I think it's a little bit more team specific. I think when you're getting here in this kind of part of the draft, I think you're looking at a couple of things. And what VR mentioned is when you start looking at contracts that are going to be coming off the books at the end of the year, and you have a player like Brian Brzee in this position, who's a player I kind of like here. My last mock draft, I had Maisie Smith there. I think either one of these 2 players are going to fit in well. I think Maisie Smith is a little bit different. He's a little bit more able to play the run. Brian Brzee has actually been, kind of mentioned as being a little bit immature, needs to develop, needs to have a little bit more work ethic on the field and things like that. I like Maisie Smith or Brzee here. I've seen more mock drafts have Brzee as a first round pick than I've had, Maisie Smith being, but I think Maisie Smith could sneak in here, and I think he's an excellent fit here with Buffalo, as I've had my last mock draft.
Love that. And the Athletic had their freak list last year, athletic freaks, and Maisie Smith was number 1 and Bryce was number 2. To go off of your high school rating thing.
Yeah, I mean, you like watch the high school tape. He's like, he's he's just like throwing dudes out of the gym. Like he was his size, and these kids just should not be playing against him.
I don't even consider Kalijah Cansey here. He's a totally different kind of interior player. Like, that's not the kind of guy they would draft. So I think they are looking at a Maisie Smith, or as we mentioned, Brzee. And I have him linked to Maisie Smith as well, who Jeremiah has called the best run blocking interior player, or run tackling interior player in this entire draft.
Oh, yeah.
And just to play devil's advocate a little bit here, I tend to think it's going to be a defensive lineman, but Buffalo is also a team that we've heard linked to possibly getting DeAndre Hopkins, wanting to add some more wide receiver talent to the other side of Stephon Diggs. And if we had a guy like Quentin Johnston, dropping here, would he be in play there for Buffalo? And I think on the outside chance, he definitely could. But I think as of what I'm looking at based on their roster and what's going to be coming off, I think defensive tackle and defensive line is definitely the play for them.
I agree.
Also,
where they don't have a lot of picks this year, I don't think. Where if you're a team trying to win a Super Bowl, wide receiver would make a lot of sense in terms of immediate impact, even though, which is an argument in itself. But wide receiver was the favorite for first position to be taken until recently, which I might have had to do with D-line being the favorite now. But I agree with that point 100%.
Also, it seems like a lot more NFL teams are down on Drew Sanders than considering he had a first-round talent. So Jack Campbell, I think, is in play here, and he's pretty much the only off-ball linebacker you should even consider going in the first round. Not that he'll be picked here, but this is where it starts, is right here in place of a linebacker that slips my head because I had 3 glasses of white wine.
Trenton Simpson.
Thank you
Jack
so much.
Campbell.
The Bills linebacker, Milano.
Oh, yeah, man.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For no help.
I like Drew Sanders. I don't know. He's an Alabama prospect. He can rush the edge, and he could play more traditional linebacker. But doing my linebacker homework, these guys come in and they start to accumulate 7.5, 8.5 tackles per game here when you start looking at these kids.
But when you don't have a lot of picks, using one of them on a non-premium position,
offensive.
What?
It's offensive.
Yeah, offensive. Yeah. it just doesn't.
4 picks to go. No tight ends off the board. And Daigle wants to sell me over 2.5 tight ends. We are
the Cowboys actually took one, but sure, Zay Flowers.
I've been pushing back on this. Is just a spot too where I don't think it's a need, and I think that it's actually, you can make a case that it's one of the not necessarily a deep position, but there are other tight ends outside of these top 3 guys that can be addressed here if the Bengals wanted to add one. But it is a very popular selection in mock drafts. I assume we'll end up doing that here because of the way that the board has fallen VR. But what are your thoughts on the Bengals at 28?
So this is one of like the more trendy spots for a tight end, which I think if you're deciding between Kincaid and Michael Mayer here, like I'm definitely defaulting to Kincaid. I think this would almost be considered him falling. But if all the tight ends are on the board still, it definitely has me thinking that like if all the tight ends are here, like everyone's gotten pushed up, the chances of one of the 5 still being in the second round, let's just say, could be a lot greater. But Kincaid makes a ton of sense. If it's not a tight end, it's very difficult to pinpoint where they go. I would say maybe corner, where they drafted at safety last year, that was like one of the greatest bets ever. That was like the first round trendy pick. Who was the guy? Dax Hill. Mm-hmm. That was the Emmanuel Forbes of this year.
And Lewis Seen.
Yeah, Lewis Seen. Kincaid. Kincaid over, like, if the Lions are going tight end, I see them taking Michael Mayer. If the Bengals are going tight end, I see them going Kincaid, in which the team that goes tight end is going to decide between the relevant question that everyone's debating on every podcast on which tight end goes first. So yeah. Kincaid bets win.
So the players that I'm looking at that I think are in play here, I tend to agree. I think it's going to be Kincaid. I think he fits that offense a little bit more. They've had meetings with both Kincaid and Michael Mayer. The other player, I think when you start talking cornerback, it's another team that's been well connected to Emmanuel Forbes, doing their homework on him. He's a player I could see here. They have not had a meeting that I've been able to track with Darnell Washington. So when that's a name that I've been starting to see linked more and more here to the Bengals. And then Jahmyr Gibbs is another player I've been seeing like kind of linked here. The player that they have had talks with and multiple meetings with is DeJuan Jones if they were to go offensive line. But here in this position, all the mocks that I track, you're looking at a tight end here, and I think Dalton Kincaid's the pick here.
This is where I was landing Anton Harrison often because there's, Jonah Williams is looking to get out. They need a tackle. They are a very, very pass heavy offense. Protecting their assets and supporting the passing game makes a ton of sense to me too. So I can get down on the DeJuan Jones thing, but we will go with Kincaid, the first tight end off the board. And the slide continues for Michael Mayer a little bit longer. But Daigle, you can make the case that there's the slide ends here, or you have another tight end you want to add to the mix.
I just want to quickly say that although he childishly yelled at me last offseason, I hold no grudges and respect Joe Goodberry. I think he does amazing work. And so he has a big board of the Bengals, and he's usually locked into these things because he's a fan. And he's a passionate fan, which I don't understand the balance there with the reporter, but whatever, no big deal. And on his big board, he has Kalijah Kancey, Dalton Kincaid, and Michael Mayer in that order of the players we should pay attention to. So I'll just say, based off of Goodberry, who, again, I think does amazing work despite what he thinks about me, that it would be Kancey going to either the Lions at 18 or the Bengals, and then otherwise you should, in my opinion, have Kancey off of your big board, like out of the first round. Or if you think they go tight end, Kincaid over Mayer. That's how I have it planned based on Goodberry. So he's doing good work out there. And then also going back to number 29 for the Saints, I'm personally linking them to Darnell Washington here. The underdog boys, Josh Norris and Hayden Winks, have already somewhat connected the Saints to bringing in Foster Moreau, initially wanting to sign a tight end, despite giving Juwan Johnson $13 million guaranteed, a whole lot of money, not only for the tight end market, but for an unrestricted free agent. That's wild. They just gave him that kind of money. But then also still having, as Nick Underhill has told us at New Orleans.football, an RAS threshold, and Washington will be the highest among all the available tight ends here. So I honestly think it makes a lot of sense that Washington, especially if we think we get 2 or 3 first-round tight ends, Washington is the pick here.
Scott, this is your neck of the woods. Any insight on the Saints and what they do here?
Look, I'll be straight up honest with this one, and Underhill's the man. When it comes to New Orleans football, he is the
Yes.
most tuned in guy down here. There's a lot of other local guys that do solid work, but when it comes down to New Orleans football, and if Underhill says it, then that's pretty much the way I would lean. I think it does make a lot of sense as to what you're looking at with them looking for a tight end. I don't think Juwan Johnson, while he did have a good year last year, I don't think he's quite the answer. I think that they're going to be looking for another person. And look, I think Quentin Johnston's in play here as well. I think they could be looking for another wide receiver. It's hard to say here with the Saints. They've lost a lot on the defensive line, but I have had them linked to Darnell Washington as well.
I think they've lost a lot on the defensive line. I think I've been kind of where I've been at, mixing in different guys depending on where they fall. They've lost a lot. Edge rusher, Shy Tuttle, Marcus Davenport. They brought in Kalen Saunders from the Chiefs, big body, but again, that's a guy that's playing 40% of the snaps or something like that. Like they need some help up front. They've lost a lot in the front seven. So Breezy Kansey makes a ton of sense to me here as well. I know you guys are passionate. Again, I just think that Juwan Johnson, they gave him a ton of money, and like Sam Laporta is here later. There's some other tight ends, Tyler Croft. There's some other guys that I think are out there that you can go out and get instead of spending at the first round. But maybe that's how they want to address the defensive line.
The other name that they have been linked to on the defensive lines on the board right here, and Felix Anaduke Uzama.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy that they have had multiple meetings with. They have been sniffing around and doing their homework on him, and I do believe that he is going to go ahead and meet some of their relative athletic score thresholds and some of the traits that they look for. So that's another guy I'd go ahead and keep an eye on.
Jack Campbell and Trenton Simpson also meet their personal RAS thresholds. Just a note.
I have no idea if this guy meets anything, but Will McDonald just feels like he feels aligned with the edge rushers that they've taken in the past. Darnell Washington.
He's got to go in one of the next three. Will McDonald's going one of the next.
So Will McDonald, from what I've been told, because I brought up Will McDonald to some of my Saints sources as well, and the concern with Will McDonald is that he's a little bit on the light side for what they want. You start looking at the way they go ahead and run that defense, specifically along the defensive line, and they tend to go a little bit heavier with their ends. You start looking at Turner and Cam Jordan, and then even who's the defensive lineman they just lost to Detroit or to Minnesota. Yeah, so that's my only concern and pushback on Will McDonald is the size.
I mean, what are Darnell Washington's second tight end off the board odds? They're probably not really fun.
Plus, isn't it plus like 600 something?
It's gotta be fun because Michael Mayer, poor guy, he's fallen.
Well, if you're gonna do that, knowing that Kincaid has potential medical issues and NFL teams are down on Mayer's blocking, just take the 10-1 at Washington first tight end. Just bite the bullet.
Hey, let's do it.
So it's like
bets at this point. What's the
Washington plus 350 second tight end, Washington plus 10-1 first tight end.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna only have two tight ends in this mock. So if we go tight end here, if we don't, then we're just gonna have one. So I feel like we should probably have tight end going here if we want to conform. But if we don't want to conform, then
let's do it. Let's go Washington.
Oh, son of... I think they're taking a defensive lineman.
It makes sense, Noonan.
I do too.
The dots connect.
I think they're definitely taking defensive lineman here.
Me too.
Continuing to scroll down. Give me a minute.
He's not in PFF's top 200, dude.
That's not our problem.
Oh, it is.
Sounds like a personal company problem.
Did Underwood is Underwood implying Washington?
Two.
It's one of the names he mentioned among 6 or 7. Go to neworleans.football, everyone. He does great work.
Like that's the stuff I buy. Like that is
of course.
That is the core to it all. Kopensky, Biggs, Underwood. Let's go.
All right. So we gave the Eagles Peter Skoronski at pick 10. Feel like everyone thinks they're going offensive line, defensive, either edge, defensive lineman, something there here at 30. But again, if you guys want to go off the board, again, the PFF board here is telling us wide receivers in need, and we still have Quentin Johnson on the board. Kind of the Eagles do.
I mean, 2 hours though, honestly, is pretty good. I mean, that's 2 hours without this happening. I mean,
not bad.
This is fantastic. Yeah.
Hey, I kicked it to VR. What do you think about the Eagles, buddy?
I think at 10, They go O-line. Like Bryce feels very likely here. Premium position. Wide receiver, like I get the wide receiver angle. The corners are off the board. Like I just think Bryce, like they're gonna get like two of the three at least, like tackle, D-line, maybe corner. They went Skoronski. I just think Bryce makes a lot of sense here as well. Keon White just has like an Eagle vibe to me. But yeah, I honestly like best player available also works, which would be Quentin, I guess, according to PFF.
I don't think it's actionable, but notable that Keon White did get a green room invite for Thursday nights. Again, I don't think there's anything.
Or like, wait, I forgot Will McDonald's on the board. Like, yeah, Will McDonald makes a ton of sense too.
Yeah,
this is also a Hendon Hooker trade back position. This is the first time where we should see it.
Oh, Hooker could have gone a lot at 29 too.
I may stick Hooker here just as a give up and be like first round player based on what NFL teams think. This is where we fit him in for a trade back.
Yeah, I don't do trades because I'm not a beta. End quote. Daigle.
I would stick him to the Eagles. I would not mention the trade. Be like, hey, this is where he goes. I'll get points for it if he's picked at 30. So whatever.
Yeah, no, it's probably sharp because you're just
understand
gaming. You're gaming the system. Yeah, you're gaming.
I understand
the
the game.
I think McDonald here or the next pick makes a lot of sense. But I'm kind of down to go with whatever FAU as well potentially. I don't know. Brizzy. Like it seems like there's like 6 guys who could go in these like last few spots.
Even Mayer. I mean, the Eagles have had when they had Ertz and what's his name? Godard, like Mayer, if he's here, which I just butchered that.
How do you not know Dallas's last name?
I love it. I love it so much.
I think you dropped that on an action pod last year and had me rolling.
Like if Mayer's here, like they're not expecting Mayer to be here.
Use Google.
Either. No.
Google pronunciation.
Yeah, why don't you pronounce rank number 32's name? Felix.
Scott nailed it, dude. Scott, I'm just gonna rely on Scott. Scott killed it.
Felix Anudike Uzomah.
Oh, that's not the hardest one. That's the Northwestern edge.
No,
that I
it's
still struggle with.
The Northwestern one's tough.
So look, when we're talking about the players here for Philadelphia, the majority of the work that they've done meeting wise are going to be players that fall into this category in this range where it's like plus 4 or 5 picks either way. The Northwestern kid that we're talking about, Adetomiwa Adebaware.
You're my boy, Scott. Good job.
Right on the back. He's actually a player that Howie Roseman's come out verbally and said that he loves the kid. I think he ran like a 4.49 or something at like 280 something pounds. But all of these guys they've had meetings with. Emmanuel Forbes has had a top 30 meeting with them, so another spot where he would possibly fall in. Just when you start linking Emmanuel Forbes to a lot of these teams in the top 30 visits he's had, I think that makes him a lock there. But Will McDonald, we talked about some of the other like Brian Brzee, all of these guys, Maisie Smith, they've put in a lot of work to some of the prospects that are going to go ahead and fall in this range, including some of the tackles, Anton Harrison and others. So this is a spot where I think you can go ahead and pencil them in. I think Brian Brzee's probably going to be the top of the line prospect here, and the way they like to build from the inside out, I would tend to lean a little bit more in his direction.
Yeah, Hargrave moving on to San Francisco as well. I think it makes a ton of sense. He's, I think, a better fit than Cansey too. So we'll go with Brian Brzee, and then I think Will McDonald could have gone in any of the last few spots. I feel like very similar to. I feel like I was doing a little bit of in the mentions and replies and is digging around and. Friend of the show, former PFF guy, now at Sumer Sports, Eric Eager, very plugged into all of the trappings of the Chiefs. Somewhat insinuated that he does not believe that Will McDonald will be here, but if he does not believe that he makes it past the spot. So I feel like this is a pretty safe, last landing spot for Will McDonald, unless anyone has any pushback.
Yeah, and I think Zerline on one of the podcasts said in his last mock, he just completely forgot about Will McDonald. And if he had remembered, he would have put him, I think, here, and he thinks he's going to go way before this. But the only thing on the Jeremiah on one of the podcasts this week, it was very subtle. He mentioned that the dude from Northwestern, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, he's going to have at the Chiefs for his final mock on Wednesday. Yeah. But I'm assuming Will McDonald wasn't available for his final mock either.
Well, I mean, we put Darnell Washington in this mock, so we definitely have made some mistakes. There's some spots for other people to be in here, so I don't hate that at all. Just messing with Daigle. So that'll do it. That is the man. Only 2 hours and 18 minutes. It's not bad. Let's see how we graded here. I wanted to look at some of the other guys that are available.
People can deal with it.
I love the grading, like as if like they know, like no one knows. It's just
we're gonna get let's see, probably a pretty bad grade because Quinn Johnson didn't go. And he was like their number 6 player on the board. So,
all right, let's see
what happens.
Let's tweet that out.
Do we want to?
We're gonna we want people to listen to the show.
Let's do it.
I don't think this is that bad. I think this was.
I
mean, who's grading at? Nobody knows shit anyway. I think this is totally fair.
Yeah, we don't get a grade. Isn't there usually a grade? Yeah.
Like Washington's the only like really drunk spot.
What? That's your one, Washington?
I mean, in this mock would be totally different if Levis didn't go too. Like that's
but he's going to.
He is. He has to.
That's what I've heard, apparently. All right. We've been here.
All right.
Hey, ship chasing goes for 3 hours. Okay, they can hang out. That's not a problem.
You are right. You are correct.
All right. We will have more mock drafts on the site, so check that out. We've been making those free over at 4for4.com. Reminder again, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll continue to stay plugged in. If you want to get the bets that we're making, jump into Discord at 4for4. Go to 4for4.com/plans. Get the betting subscription, or you can go over and download the Vivid app. Vivid's a pick'em site. You're familiar with Vivid Seats. They also have pick'em games that you're familiar with. Download that app, deposit a minimum of $5. They'll match your deposit up to $200. So you can go much bigger than that if you want. But the minimum $5 deposit with promo code 4for4bet, and you will get a 3-month betting subscription to 4for4. So you won't get anything during the football season, but you get everything else that we do on the site between now and then. Scott does great work on the MMA side, still grinding NBA playoffs. Lots of other great stuff coming in the future. So you get a little bit of our future work here and all the NBA and NFL draft stuff as well. VR, where can everyone find all of your fantastic work? They got to buy your sheet, right? They can still buy your sheet.
Oh yeah. Vegas Refund on Twitter. It's pinned to the top. Yeah, it's great. Sign up. It's
good selling
really
point.
It's really, really expensive. $35. Wow. Michael Mayer already getting steamed off of our mock draft. Wow. Just kidding.
It's not great.
Yeah,
we didn't get an actual grade. I don't know. I give it a solid A-. I think we did pretty well. There was a good amount of mutual respect here on the board.
I agree.
I think Scott probably wanted to go a little bit different at the top. We very much leaned, I think, on him on the bottom. So I think we try to balance it out a little bit. But Scott will have a final mock on the site at 4for4.com that you'll want to read here in the coming days. So we all have to have the final draft submitted by Wednesday evening. So look for those either Wednesday or Thursday on the site. What you got, VR?
No, I was just gonna say, like, the top of the draft, like the strong opinions, like, are there because there's only a couple ways you could go. Or when you get to the end of the draft, like anything can go where the process is so much smoother. I don't even know why I'm bringing this up, but you called me out. So
I think I'll probably have something different on Monday too. I got a lot of thoughts burning in my head. So I'll probably have like a Daigle's 10 thoughts on the draft article for everyone too. I got some ideas.
I hate to see this, Daigle. Well reasoned on everything, fellas. Daigle broke up the
Sorry, Silva. Sorry, Silva.
Dude,
I can't just let the man live. He's happy. I can't let him live.
I mean, there are some true loyalists in here. If they sat through that entire 2 years, shout out to you. Plus loyalty points. Yeah, we very much appreciate that. While you're here hanging out, like on the video goes a long way. Sub to the channel 4for4 bets. We have a 4for4 YouTube page as well if you want more of Daigle and underdog and redraft and all that stuff. That's over there as well. Connor, Scott, and I have been hanging out here on the Bets channel, so check that out. So good stuff as always, gentlemen. We appreciate it very much. So for Connor, Daigle, Scott, VR, I'm Ryan. We'll see you.